Political Science, 2. Semester, 3, Part 1. Answer in 2 sentences. 1. What is legitimacy? Legitimacy refers to the public acceptance of the authority exercised by the state or government. A state is considered legitimate when people believe its laws and institutions are morally justified. Legitimacy creates voluntary obedience rather than forced compliance. It strengthens stability because citizens trust the decision-making process. For example, India's democratic elections give legitimacy to the government chosen through universal adult franchise. 2. What is legitimacy? How is power legalized in modern democracy? Legitimacy means that the authority of the state is accepted by citizens as valid and rightful. In modern democracies, power is legalized when it is derived from constitutional procedures. This includes elections, rule of law, and separation of powers. Such legal frameworks restrict arbitrary use of authority and protect citizens' rights. For example, a prime minister in India gains legal authority only after being elected to parliament and appointed under Article 75 of the Constitution. 3. Explain the importance of legitimacy for the state. Legitimacy ensures that citizens obey laws willingly rather than out of fear. It reduces the need for force and helps maintain social order. A legitimate state enjoys political stability and efficient governance. It also increases public participation and respect for institutions. For example, India's acceptance of the Supreme Court's judgments shows legitimacy of judicial authority. 4. What are the key indicators of legitimacy within a nation-state? Key indicators include free and fair elections, rule of law, transparency, and public trust in institutions. Protection of rights and equality before law are also major signs of legitimacy. Stable political leadership and low corruption increase public confidence. Public compliance with laws without coercion is another strong indicator. For example, high voter turnout in Indian elections reflects trust in democratic processes. 5. How does a state maintain its legitimacy? A state maintains legitimacy by upholding constitutional values and delivering justice. It must ensure transparency, accountability, and protection of citizens' rights. Responsive governance and welfare policies also strengthen public trust. The state must avoid corruption and arbitrary use of power. For example, the Right to Information Act, 2005 enhances legitimacy by promoting transparency in governance. 6. What is legitimacy? Legitimacy refers to the public acceptance of the authority exercised by the state or government. A state is considered legitimate when people believe its laws and institutions are morally justified. Legitimacy creates voluntary obedience rather than forced compliance. It strengthens stability because citizens trust the decision-making process. For example, India's democratic elections give legitimacy to the government chosen through universal adult franchise. 7. What is legitimacy? How is power legalized in modern democracy? Legitimacy means that the authority of the state is accepted by citizens as valid and rightful. In modern democracies, power is legalized when it is derived from constitutional procedures. This includes elections, rule of law, and separation of powers. Such legal frameworks restrict arbitrary use of authority and protect citizens' rights. For example, a prime minister in India gains legal authority only after being elected to parliament and appointed under Article 75 of the Constitution. 8. Explain the importance of legitimacy for the state. Legitimacy ensures that citizens obey laws willingly rather than out of fear. It reduces the need for force and helps maintain social order. A legitimate state enjoys political stability and efficient governance. It also increases public participation and respect for institutions. For example, India's acceptance of the Supreme Court's judgments shows legitimacy of judicial authority. 9. What are the key indicators of legitimacy within a nation-state? Key indicators include free and fair elections, rule of law, transparency, and public trust in institutions. Protection of rights and equality before law are also major signs of legitimacy. Stable political leadership and low corruption increase public confidence. Public compliance with laws without coercion is another strong indicator. For example, high voter turnout in Indian elections reflects trust in democratic processes. 10. How does a state maintain its legitimacy? A state maintains legitimacy by upholding constitutional values and delivering justice. It must ensure transparency, accountability, and protection of citizens' rights. Responsive governance and welfare policies also strengthen public trust. The state must avoid corruption and arbitrary use of power. For example, the Right to Information Act, 2005 enhances legitimacy by promoting transparency in governance. 11. Who is an elite? Who advocated the concept of power elite? An elite is a small group of people who hold dominant positions in society. They control major political, economic, or social institutions. The concept of the power elite was advocated by C. Wright Mills. He argued that power is concentrated among military, corporate, and political leaders in modern states. For example, in India, top bureaucrats, corporate leaders, and political executives often shape important policy decisions. 12. Who says organization? Says oligarchy. Who said this and why? This statement was given by Robert Michaels. He argued that all large organizations naturally develop leadership control. Over time, leaders gain more decision-making power than ordinary members. This results in an oligarchic structure, even in democratic organizations. For example, major political parties in India are often dominated by a small leadership circle. 13. Name any two differences between the elite theory of power and Marxian theory of power. Elite theory says power is held by a small ruling minority, while Marxism says power comes from control of economic resources. Elite theory focuses on political and organizational leadership. Marxism focuses on class relations. Elites can come from any background, but Marxism centers on the bourgeoisie. Elites rotate, but Marxism sees class struggle as inevitable. Example, elite theory explains bureaucratic power in India, while Marxism explains labor-capital conflict. 14. Briefly explain Pareto's theory of the circulation of elites. Pareto argued that elites are constantly replaced through a natural cycle. Old elites decline due to loss of qualities, and new elites rise with superior abilities. This circulation prevents stagnation in society. He classified elites as lions, forceful, and foxes, clever. For example, in Indian politics, generational leadership change in parties reflects circulation of elites. 15. What is the iron law of oligarchy? Who advocated it? The iron law of oligarchy states that all organizations, regardless of their ideals, eventually become dominated by a small group. It was advocated by Robert Michaels. He believed that leadership control is inevitable due to organizational needs. Democratic structures therefore tend to become oligarchic over time. For example, trade unions and political parties in India often remain controlled by a few leaders. 16. Analyze the difference between power and authority. Power is the capacity to compel behavior, while authority is legitimate power accepted by society. Authority rests on laws and norms, but power may exist without legality. Authority ensures stable obedience, while power may provoke resistance. Authority requires consent, power requires capability. For example, a court order carries authority, but a militant group may exercise power without legality. 17. What is political obligation? Political obligation refers to the moral and legal duty of citizens to obey the laws of the state. It arises because citizens benefit from security, order, and public goods provided by the government. A stable political system depends on people respecting authority voluntarily. Political obligation ensures cooperation between the state and individuals. For example, obeying traffic laws in India is a political obligation because it promotes public safety and order. 18. What is the sanction behind political obligation according to the divine right theory of kings? According to the divine right theory, the king's authority comes directly from God. The sanction behind political obligation is, therefore, religious fear and moral duty to obey God's representative. Disobedience to the king was viewed as disobedience to God. This theory justified absolute monarchy and discouraged rebellion. For instance, medieval European monarchs like Louis XIV claimed divine authority to rule unquestioned. 19. What is the force theory of political obligation? The force theory states that political obligation arises from fear of coercive power. People obey the state because it has the ability to enforce laws through police and military. This theory focuses on physical power rather than moral duty. Obedience is maintained through threat of punishment. For example, during the emergency in India, 1975–77, many citizens obeyed due to strict enforcement and fear of state action. 20. What is the social contract theory of political obligation? The social contract theory holds that people voluntarily create a state to protect their rights. Citizens agree to obey laws in return for security and justice. Political obligation arises from this mutual consent between individuals and the state. If the state fails to protect rights, the contract becomes invalid. For example, India's constitution represents a social contract where people consent to be governed under democratic principles. 21. What is the utilitarian perspective of political obligation? The utilitarian perspective states that people must obey the state because it promotes the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Political obligation is justified when laws produce social welfare and public benefit. Obedience should continue as long as the state enhances overall happiness. If laws create harm, people may resist them. For example, public health laws like compulsory vaccination are justified under utilitarian logic. 22. Why is the divine right theory of political obligation advocated? The divine right theory was advocated to justify absolute authority of monarchs. It argued that rulers were chosen by God, making obedience a religious duty. This prevented rebellion and ensured unquestioned power of kings. It also helped maintain social order in feudal societies. An example is James I of England, who claimed divine authority to strengthen monarchical power. 23. Name any one drawback of divine right theory of political obligation. A major drawback is that it provides no mechanism to challenge unjust rulers. It denies people the right to question or replace a tyrannical king. Such unchecked power often leads to misuse of authority. It contradicts modern democratic principles of popular sovereignty. For example, the Glorious Revolution, 1688, rejected divine authority in favor of parliamentary supremacy. 24. Name any one feature of the state of nature as given by Thomas Hobbes. According to Hobbes, the state of nature is a condition of constant fear and insecurity. Life in this state is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. There is no authority to protect people or settle disputes. Humans act purely out of self-interest. For example, Hobbes compared the state of nature to civil war where no law exists. 25. What is the view of Hobbes on the nature of political obligation? Hobbes believed political obligation arises when individuals surrender their freedom to a sovereign. The sovereign provides peace and security in exchange for obedience. Once power is given, subjects cannot resist the sovereign. This absolute authority prevents chaos and conflict. For example, a strong central government like Leviathan prevents disorder by enforcing strict laws. 26. State of nature and the social contract as given by John Locke. Locke believed the state of nature is peaceful but lacks an impartial authority. People possess natural rights: life, liberty, and property. They form a social contract to create a government that protects these rights. If the government violates the contract, citizens have a right to revolt. For example, the American Revolution was inspired by Locke's idea of resisting unjust government. 27. What is the harm principle as given by J.S. Mill? J.S. Mill argued that individuals are free to act as they wish unless their actions harm others. The state cannot interfere in personal freedom unless harm is involved. This principle protects liberty while preventing injury to society. It limits power of the state over private life. For example, banning drunk driving is justified because it prevents harm to others. 28. Name any provision of the Indian Constitution reflecting this view of J.S. Mill. Article 19, 2, reflects the harm principle by allowing reasonable restrictions on freedom of speech to prevent harm to public order and morality. It ensures that liberty is balanced with social protection. The state may limit rights only when necessary to prevent harm. This reflects Mill's idea of safeguarding society while preserving individual freedom. For example, hate speech laws limit harmful expression while protecting free speech rights. 29. What is participatory democracy? Participatory democracy is a model where citizens take direct part in decision-making rather than merely voting for representatives. It emphasizes grassroots involvement through local bodies, public consultations, and community participation. This system strengthens accountability and keeps representatives responsive to people's needs. It also empowers marginalized groups by giving them a direct voice in governance. For example, India's Panchayati Raj system under the 73rd Amendment is a major instrument of participatory democracy. 30. Why is an enlightened public opinion essential for the successful working of democracy? Enlightened public opinion means views formed through education, awareness, and accurate information. It prevents manipulation by politicians, media, or interest groups. A democracy functions effectively when citizens make informed choices and hold leaders accountable. Enlightened opinion also protects minority rights by discouraging mob mentality. For example, the RTI Act helps citizens form informed opinions by making government information accessible. 31. Why is sound public opinion regarded as essential in modern democracy? Sound public opinion reflects the collective, rational preferences of society. It guides government policies and helps safeguard democratic legitimacy. Modern states rely on public support for implementing laws and reforms. A strong and healthy public opinion also prevents authoritarian tendencies. For example, public pressure after the Nirbhaya case led to major criminal law reforms through the 2013 amendment. 32. Why is an active opposition regarded necessary for the success of democracy? An active opposition monitors government actions and prevents misuse of power. It offers alternative policies and encourages debate on national issues. Opposition ensures checks and balances, promoting transparency and accountability. Without effective opposition, democracy risks turning into majoritarian rule. For example, the leader of the opposition in India plays a crucial role in committees such as the Public Accounts Committee. 33. Right. 4 reasons for the ethical decay of democracy. Ethical decay occurs due to corruption, where public office is used for personal benefit. Political criminalization weakens moral standards and public trust. Vote bank politics encourages caste, religion, and identity manipulation. Media bias and misinformation distort democratic debates. For example, the rising number of legislators with criminal cases in India shows ethical erosion in the political system. 34. Challenges to Indian democracy. Indian democracy faces challenges such as corruption, which undermines public trust. Communalism and casteism divide society and threaten national unity. Economic inequality limits equal participation in democratic processes. Weak law enforcement and delays in justice delivery also weaken democratic institutions. For example, electoral violence and money power during elections show persistent challenges to Indian democracy. 35. Name 2 fundamental rights given to both citizens and foreigners in India. 2 fundamental rights available to both citizens and foreigners are Article 14, Right to Equality, and Article 21, Right to Life and Personal Liberty. These rights ensure that every person within Indian territory receives basic legal protection. They form part of the golden triangle of rights that safeguard individual dignity. These rights apply irrespective of nationality, religion, or immigration status. For example, the Supreme Court extended Article 21 protection even to foreign prisoners in the Charles Sobitridge case. 36. Name 1 fundamental right available to citizens and non-citizens in India. A major fundamental right available to both is Article 21, Right to Life and Personal Liberty. This right cannot be suspended even during an emergency. It ensures that no person is deprived of life except by a fair, just, and reasonable procedure. The right has expanded to include dignity, privacy, and livelihood. For example, in Maneka Gandhi v. Union of India, 1978, Article 21 was interpreted broadly to protect all persons, whether citizens or foreigners. 37. Write any 3 rights given in Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Article 21 includes the right to privacy, recognized in the Puttaswamy Judgment, 2017. It also includes the right to live with human dignity, which covers shelter, food, and health. Another component is the right to a fair and speedy trial, essential for justice delivery. These expansions were developed through judicial interpretation. For example, the right to legal aid was held part of Article 21 in Husainara Khatun v. State of Bihar. 38. What is right to education as given in Part 3 of the Constitution of India? The right to education is provided under Article 21A, inserted by the 86th Constitutional Amendment. It mandates free and compulsory education for children aged 6 to 14 years. This right ensures equal access to basic education irrespective of socio-economic status. It strengthens human development and empowers disadvantaged groups. For example, the Root Act, 2009 operationalizes this right by requiring private schools to reserve 25% seats for economically weaker sections. 39. What is the status of right to education in India? The right to education is a fundamental right for children between 6 and 14. Beyond this age group, it is considered a directive principle under Article 41. The Root Act enforces standards such as qualified teachers and adequate infrastructure. Despite progress, challenges include dropouts, infrastructure gaps, and quality issues. For example, many states still struggle to fill teacher vacancies, affecting the realization of root goals. 40. What is the difference between equality before the law and equal protection of the laws? Equality before the law means no person is above the law, ensuring equal legal status. Equal protection of laws means like cases are treated alike, allowing reasonable classification. The first is a negative concept, no special privileges, while the second is a positive obligation on the state. Together, they ensure fairness and justice in governance. For example, reservation policies are valid under equal protection because they classify individuals based on objective criteria. 41. Cite the provision of Article 1(1) of the Indian Constitution. Article 1(1) states, India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. It signifies the federal structure but with unitary features. This formulation highlights the indestructible union of states. It also clarifies the constitutional identity of the nation. For example, even if states change boundaries, India remains an indivisible union under this article. 42. Cite any two provisions under Article 20 of the Indian Constitution. Article 20(1) prohibits ex post facto criminal laws, meaning a person cannot be punished for an act that was not an offense when committed. Article 20(2) states no person shall be prosecuted and punished for the same offense more than once, double jeopardy. These safeguards protect individuals from arbitrary state action. They apply even during emergencies. For example, a person cannot be punished retroactively if a new law criminalizes an old act. 43. Write the provision of Article 17 of the Indian Constitution. Article 17 abolishes untouchability and forbids its practice in any form. It makes enforcement of untouchability an offense punishable by law. This right upholds social equality and human dignity. It is enforceable against both state and private individuals. For example, the Protection of Civil Rights Act, 1955 was enacted to implement Article 17. 44. Name any two freedoms as given under Article 19 and its reasonable limitations. Article 19(1)(a) grants freedom of speech and expression, subject to limitations like public order, morality, and defamation. Article 19(1)(b) gives freedom to assemble peacefully, restricted for sovereignty, public order, and national security. These freedoms ensure democratic participation. However, limitations ensure that individual liberty does not harm society. For example, hate speech restrictions are valid under reasonable limitations to maintain public order. 45. What is an unwritten constitution? Give an example. An unwritten constitution is not contained in a single formal document. Instead, it consists of customs, judicial decisions, conventions, and statutes. Such constitutions evolve gradually and are flexible. They rely heavily on historical practices and precedents. For example, the United Kingdom has an unwritten constitution based on conventions like the Prime Minister's role and parliamentary sovereignty. 46. Name two differences between utilitarianism and sarvodaya. Utilitarianism focuses on the greatest happiness of the greatest number, while sarvodaya emphasizes welfare of all, including the weakest. Utilitarianism may justify actions that harm minorities if the majority benefits, whereas sarvodaya rejects any harm to any individual. Utilitarianism is rooted in Western philosophy through Bentham and Mill, whereas sarvodaya arises from Gandhian thought. Sarvodaya focuses on nonviolence and moral upliftment, unlike utilitarianism which focuses on pleasure and utility. For example, reservation policies reflect sarvodaya ideals by uplifting weaker sections rather than only maximizing majority benefit. 47. Name two differences between Sarvodaya and utilitarianism. Sarvodaya is based on moral values and equal welfare for every person, while utilitarianism is based on maximizing overall happiness. Sarvodaya prohibits exploitation even if beneficial to many, while utilitarianism may allow it if total utility increases. Sarvodaya promotes decentralization and self-reliance, whereas utilitarianism is neutral on political structure. Utilitarianism is quantitative, but Sarvodaya is qualitative and moral. For example, Gandhi's village Swaraj reflects Sarvodaya, while public health vaccination policies reflect utilitarianism. 48. What is the utilitarian perspective of political obligation? Utilitarianism holds that political obligation exists because obedience to the state produces the greatest happiness for society. People follow laws when they maximize public welfare and minimize harm. The state's legitimacy depends on its ability to promote social utility. If laws cause suffering, individuals may morally question their obligation. For example, compulsory helmet laws are justified because they prevent injuries and reduce societal costs, serving overall utility. 49. What is the modern liberalism perception of the state? Modern liberalism views the state as a positive force that promotes social justice and welfare. It supports regulation of the economy to prevent inequality and provide basic services. Unlike classical liberalism, it does not restrict the state to minimal functions. It emphasizes rights like education, health, and social security. For example, the Indian Constitution reflects modern liberalism through directive principles promoting welfare measures. 50. Write two merits and demerits of liberalism. Two merits of liberalism are protection of individual liberty and promotion of democratic participation. It encourages social reform, freedom of expression, and equality of opportunity. However, liberalism may lead to excessive individualism, weakening social cohesion. It may also neglect economic inequality if markets remain unregulated. For example, unregulated social media freedom reflects liberalism but can also lead to misinformation and social conflict. 51. Name any two criticisms against Marxism. Marxism is criticized for predicting the inevitable collapse of capitalism, which has not occurred. It underestimates the ability of democratic systems to reform and reduce inequality. Marxism's emphasis on class struggle oversimplifies social relations. It often leads to authoritarian regimes when implemented. For example, the fall of the Soviet Union is considered a practical failure of Marxist governance. 52. Why is Marxian dialectics known as dialectical materialism? Marxian dialectics is called dialectical materialism because it interprets social change through conflicts based on material conditions, not ideas. According to Marx, economic forces shape history through contradictions between classes. Progress occurs through a dialectic process: thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. This materialist approach rejects idealist philosophies. For example, the industrial worker-capitalist conflict reflects material contradictions leading to social change. 53. Who advocated the concept of surplus value and why? Karl Marx advocated the concept of surplus value to explain exploitation under capitalism. He argued that workers create more value through labor than the wages they receive. The extra value is taken by capitalists as profit, creating economic inequality. Surplus value forms the basis of class conflict in Marxist theory. For example, factory workers producing goods worth far more than their wages illustrates surplus value extraction. 54. What is Satyagraha? Satyagraha is Gandhi's method of nonviolent struggle based on truth and moral persuasion. It seeks to convert the opponent through self-suffering rather than force or coercion. The goal is not to defeat the adversary but to awaken their conscience and achieve justice. Satyagraha is rooted in deep ethical commitment and voluntary civil discipline. For example, Gandhi's Salt March, 1930, is a classic instance of Satyagraha challenging colonial salt laws without violence. 55. What are the two pillars of Satyagraha? The two pillars of Satyagraha are truth, satya, and nonviolence, ahimsa. Truth demands honesty, transparency, and moral courage in public life. Nonviolence requires resisting injustice without physical or emotional harm. Together, they create a powerful moral force that influences both society and the oppressor. For example, the Quit India movement demonstrated these pillars, as peaceful resistance aimed to expose the injustice of British rule. 56. What is resistance to laws and how is it exercised? Resistance to laws refers to the moral right to oppose laws considered unjust or oppressive. According to Gandhi, such resistance must be nonviolent, open, and willing to accept punishment. It is exercised through civil disobedience, boycotts, hurdles, and peaceful protests. The purpose is to highlight injustice and appeal to public conscience. For example, refusing to comply with the Rowlatt Act in 1919 was an instance of resisting an unjust colonial law. 57. Gandhian techniques of resistance against unjust laws. Gandhian techniques include non-cooperation, where people withdraw their support from unjust authorities. Another method is civil disobedience, involving deliberate, peaceful violation of unjust laws. Boycott of foreign goods and institutions was also used to weaken colonial control. Gandhi emphasized fasting and public persuasion to appeal to the moral conscience of the ruling power. For example, the boycott of British cloth during the Swadeshi movement was a Gandhian tactic to resist unjust economic policies. 58. What is the difference between a political party and an interest group? A political party seeks to capture governmental power by contesting elections, while an interest group seeks to influence government policies without aiming to form a government. Political parties have broad policy agendas, whereas interest groups focus on specific issues like business, environment, or caste interests. Parties require large public support, whereas interest groups mobilize limited target groups. Parties have constitutional recognition, example, Representation of People Act, but interest groups operate informally. For example, the Indian National Congress is a political party, while FICCI is an interest group that influences policy. 59. Name any two features of political parties in India. Indian political parties often have a centralized leadership structure, where key decisions are made by top leaders. They also function on the basis of party ideology, which guides their policies and election strategies. Most parties in India maintain a national or regional character depending on their support base. They play a crucial role in forming governments and the opposition. For example, regional parties like DMK dominate Tamil Nadu politics, while BJP is a national party. 60. What is coalition politics? Give one factor for its rise. Coalition politics refers to a system where multiple political parties cooperate to form a government because no single party wins a majority. It is common in countries with multi-party systems and diverse social structures. A major factor for its rise in India is regionalization of politics, where strong state-based parties limit national parties' dominance. Coalitions promote bargaining, compromise, and shared governance. For example, the UPA and NDA governments at the center were formed through coalitions of several parties. 61. What is an interest group? Name one interest group from India. An interest group is an organized body that seeks to influence public policy without contesting elections or seeking governmental power. These groups represent specific interests such as business, labor, environment, caste, or farmers. They exert pressure on lawmakers through lobbying, media campaigns, and public mobilization. Their role is to ensure that the concerns of their members are addressed in policy making. For example, FICCI, Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, is a major interest group in India. 62. What is an interest group? Name one caste-based agitation in Maharashtra. Interest groups seek to influence government decisions on behalf of particular social, economic, or cultural groups. They do not contest elections but advocate for their interests through organized campaigns. These groups often emerge from caste, community, industry, or occupational associations. They can significantly influence political decisions through protests and negotiations. For example, the Maratha reservation agitation in Maharashtra is a caste-based pressure movement demanding reservation benefits. 63. Name two differences between interest groups and pressure groups. Interest groups represent specific sections of society like business, workers, or caste groups, while pressure groups actively apply pressure on the government to influence decisions. Interest groups may remain passive, but pressure groups use methods such as strikes, lobbying, and campaigns. All pressure groups are interest groups, but not all interest groups act as pressure groups. Pressure groups directly try to shape public policy, whereas interest groups may focus on representation and awareness. For example, trade unions like INTUC operate as pressure groups when they organize strikes to influence labor laws. 64. Name one reason for the rise of regional political parties in India. One major reason for the rise of regional political parties in India is the regional diversity of social, cultural, and linguistic identities. National parties often fail to address localized issues such as regional development, language protection, or caste-based concerns. Regional parties emerge to represent these specific aspirations more effectively. For example, the formation of the Telugu Desam Party, TDP, in Andhra Pradesh was driven by regional demands for recognition and development. 65. Name one regional political party from Tamil Nadu. A well-known regional political party from Tamil Nadu is the Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam, DMK. The party emerged from the Dravidian movement seeking social justice and linguistic rights. It has played a central role in Tamil Nadu politics for decades. DMK focuses on regional identity, welfare schemes, and anti-Hindi imposition policies. For example, DMK's rise is linked to resistance against the 1965 Hindi imposition movement. 66. What is regionalism? Regionalism is a political ideology that emphasizes the interests, culture, and identity of a specific geographic region over national concerns. It emerges when people feel their region is neglected or underrepresented by the central government. Regionalism is not necessarily anti-national but seeks balanced federal development. It can strengthen democracy by ensuring local issues receive attention. For example, the demand for Gorkhaland in West Bengal reflects regionalism rooted in cultural and administrative grievances. 67. Name two factors responsible for the rise of regionalism in India. First, regional imbalance in development creates dissatisfaction when certain states or districts feel economically neglected. Second, linguistic and cultural identities motivate people to preserve their heritage and demand autonomy. Political factors, such as weak national leadership or coalition politics, further accelerate regionalism. Migration and fear of losing jobs can also intensify regional demands. For instance, the Shiv Sena in Maharashtra originally grew by demanding job protection for sons of the soil against migrant workers. 68. Name two differences between retributive and reformative theory of punishment. The retributive theory focuses on punishing the offender to give them their just deserts, while the reformative theory aims to change the offender's behavior. Retributive punishment treats crime as moral wrongdoing deserving revenge, whereas reformative punishment views crime as a social failure needing correction. Retribution uses deterrence and fear, whereas reformative measures use counseling, education, and rehabilitation. For example, India's Juvenile Justice Act applies the reformative approach by treating minors with rehabilitation rather than harsh punishment. 69. Right. 2 merits and demerits of reformative theory of punishment. 2 merits of the reformative theory are that it rehabilitates offenders into law-abiding citizens and reduces repeat offending by addressing root causes. It also upholds human dignity, making punishment consistent with constitutional values under Article 21. However, one demerit is that serious criminals may misuse leniency and fail to reform. Another drawback is that reformative measures require significant resources, specialized staff, and infrastructure. For example, open prisons in Rajasthan show success in rehabilitation but require strict monitoring to prevent misuse. 70. Why is giving punishment regarded as state responsibility? Punishment is the state's responsibility because only the state has legitimate authority to maintain law and order. This prevents individuals from taking revenge and ensures justice through legal procedures. The state must punish in accordance with due process under Articles 20 and 21. Fair and regulated punishment promotes social security and prevents chaos. For example, the court-ordered punishment in the Nirbhaya case shows how the state alone can lawfully punish offenders. 71. State the rationale for the state's imposition of punishment. The state imposes punishment to protect society from harmful acts and maintain public order. Punishment also deters others from committing similar crimes. It expresses society's condemnation of the wrongful act and upholds moral standards. Further, punishment helps achieve justice by balancing rights of the offender, victim, and society. For example, punishments under the Indian Penal Code deter crimes like theft, assault, and murder by establishing clear legal consequences. 72. Explain the concept of laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is an economic philosophy advocating minimal government interference in economic activities. Under this system, markets regulate themselves through supply and demand without state control. It promotes private enterprise, free competition, and individual economic freedom. Critics argue that it can lead to inequality and exploitation without state regulation. For example, pre-independence colonial India saw minimal state intervention in industries, allowing private traders and zamindars to dominate economic activity. 73. State any 3 provisions in fundamental rights for the ideal of socialism. The Constitution promotes socialist ideals through Article 14, ensuring equality before law. Article 21 expands the right to life to include dignity, livelihood, and social welfare. Article 23 prohibits human trafficking and forced labor, protecting vulnerable groups. These rights aim to reduce exploitation and promote social justice. For example, the Supreme Court's interpretation of Article 21 to include the right to livelihood, Olga Tellis case, reflects socialist principles. 74. Socialism's influence on the Indian Constitution. Socialism influenced the Constitution by promoting social and economic justice as core values. It led to provisions like directive principles encouraging wealth redistribution, workers' rights, and public welfare. The word socialist was added to the preamble by the 42nd Amendment to strengthen this commitment. Policies such as land reforms and reservation systems also reflect socialist ideals. For example, abolition of the zamindari system after independence was a socialist-driven measure to reduce inequality. 75. What is coup d'état? A coup d'état is the sudden and unlawful overthrow of an existing government by a small group, usually involving the military or political insiders. It bypasses constitutional methods and relies on force or intimidation. Coups occur without mass public participation and are often executed quickly to avoid resistance. They aim to seize state power rather than change the entire socio-economic system. For example, the 2021 military coup in Myanmar removed the elected government through armed force. 76. Name one difference between coup d'état and revolution. A coup d'état is executed by a small elite group, often the military, whereas a revolution involves mass participation from the general public. A coup changes only the leadership, while a revolution aims to transform the entire political and social order. Coups are sudden and secretive, whereas revolutions take longer and are openly mobilized. Revolutions usually demand structural change, while coups focus on seizing governmental control. For example, the Russian Revolution, 1917, overthrew the entire social system, unlike coups which only change rulers. 77. What is general will? General will is a concept developed by Rousseau, referring to the collective will of the people aimed at the common good. It represents the true interests of society rather than individual or group interests. General will guides the legitimacy of laws in a democratic state. It emphasizes equality, moral freedom, and shared responsibility. For example, laws passed by India's parliament are assumed to reflect the general will as they represent the will of the people through elected representatives. 78. What is sovereignty of two masters? Sovereignty of two masters refers to a situation where authority is divided between two competing powers, leading to conflict and instability. It suggests that a person or institution cannot serve two supreme authorities at the same time. In political theory, it highlights the need for a single, ultimate source of authority in a state. Dual sovereignty leads to confusion and weakens the functioning of governance. For example, in colonial India, conflicts arose because Indians were expected to obey both British rulers and their own traditional leadership, illustrating two masters. Short notes. 1. Retributive theory of punishment and its defects. The retributive theory of punishment is one of the oldest concepts in criminal jurisprudence. It is based on the idea that a wrongdoer deserves to suffer for the harm caused, often summarized by the phrase an eye for an eye. According to this theory, punishment is not meant to reform or deter but to give the offender what they morally deserve. The focus is on the past action of the offender, not on the future impact of punishment. The main purpose is to restore the moral balance that was disturbed by the crime. Features of the retributive theory include proportionality, meaning the severity of punishment must match the seriousness of the offense, moral blameworthiness, where liability depends on the offender's intention, and the idea of social retaliation, where society takes revenge in an organized and lawful manner instead of allowing personal vengeance. However, the retributive theory faces several defects. First, it risks promoting revenge rather than justice, making punishment emotionally driven rather than rational. Second, it ignores the social and psychological reasons behind criminal behavior. Third, it does not attempt to reform the offender or prevent future crime. Fourth, extreme application may lead to cruelty or excessive punishment. Modern criminal justice emphasizes rehabilitation and deterrence, which this theory fails to consider. Example, if a person convicted of theft is subjected to the same harm they caused such as confiscating their property, it reflects strict retribution. However, this does not address the reasons behind the theft, such as poverty or lack of education, showing the limitations of this approach. 2. Deterrent theory of punishment. The deterrent theory of punishment aims to prevent crime by creating fear of consequences. According to this theory, people will avoid committing offenses if they know that the punishment is certain, severe, and prompt. Its main focus is crime prevention, not revenge or reform. This theory assumes that humans are rational beings who weigh the benefits of crime against the possible punishment. Deterrence operates in two forms: general deterrence and specific deterrence. General deterrence is directed at society as a whole. When people see that offenders are punished, they are discouraged from committing similar offenses. Specific deterrence targets the individual offender so that fear of punishment prevents them from repeating the crime in the future. Key features include certainty of punishment: punishment must follow the crime reliably. Severity: the punishment should be harsh enough to outweigh the benefits of crime. And publicity: punishments must be known to the public so fear is created. Laws like strict traffic penalties, cybercrime fines, and anti-corruption statutes commonly use deterrence. However, deterrence has limitations. Criminals acting under emotional stress, poverty, addiction, or ignorance may not think rationally. In such cases, fear of punishment does not work effectively. Excessively harsh punishments can also violate human rights and lead to injustice. Example: heavy fines and license suspension for drunk driving serve as deterrent measures. When the public sees strict enforcement such as police checkpoints and penalties, it discourages others from driving under the influence. This demonstrates the preventive function of deterrence. 3. Reformative approach to punishment. The reformative theory of punishment focuses on changing the offender into a better, law-abiding member of society. It believes that people commit crimes due to environmental, social, psychological, or economic factors, and with proper guidance, education, and support, they can be reformed. The goal is not to inflict pain but to transform the offender's character and prevent future offenses. Key features of this theory include counseling, education, vocational training, psychological treatment, and rehabilitation programs. Prisons under the reformative model aim to become correctional institutions rather than places of suffering. Instead of isolating offenders permanently, society attempts to reintegrate them, reducing recidivism. This theory emphasizes dignity, humane treatment, and second chances, especially for young or first-time offenders. Modern legal systems often blend reformative measures with other theories. For example, parole, probation, community service, juvenile homes, and open prisons reflect the reformative approach. India's Juvenile Justice Act is largely based on the idea that children in conflict with law should not be punished but corrected. However, critics argue that excessive leniency may reduce fear of law. Reform requires strong institutional support, trained professionals, and social acceptance factors that may not always be available. Despite this, most modern criminologists agree that long-term crime reduction is best achieved through rehabilitation rather than harsh punishment. Example: under the juvenile justice system, a juvenile involved in theft or assault is sent to a rehabilitation home rather than a conventional prison. They receive education, counseling, and skill training, helping them reintegrate into society. This illustrates how the reformative theory aims at behavioral transformation instead of retribution. 4. Marxism and Gandhianism, a comparative study. Marxism and Gandhianism are two influential socio-political philosophies that aim to create a just society but differ greatly in method and ideology. Marxism, developed by Karl Marx, focuses on economic structures and argues that society is divided into classes: the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. According to Marx, exploitation arises from private ownership of means of production. The only solution is class revolution and establishment of a classless, communist society through force if required. Gandhianism, on the other hand, is centered on moral, spiritual, and nonviolent transformation of society. Gandhi believed that social change must be achieved through truth, satya, nonviolence, ahimsa, and self-discipline. He rejected violent revolution and insisted that oppression can be resisted through peaceful civil disobedience and moral persuasion. While Marxism sees the state as an instrument of class oppression that must eventually wither away, Gandhi saw the state as necessary but should remain minimal, ethical, and service-oriented. Key differences. Marxism supports violent revolution. Gandhism supports nonviolent resistance. Marxism focuses on material conditions. Gandhism emphasizes ethics and spirituality. Marxism aims for a classless society. Gandhi aims for a harmonious society with decentralized village communities. Example, during India's freedom struggle, Gandhi used nonviolent mass movements like the Salt Satyagraha, showing his belief in peaceful resistance. A Marxist approach would instead encourage workers to overthrow oppressive systems through revolution. Thus, both aim to remove exploitation, but their paths and philosophical bases differ significantly. 5. Marxian concept of class and class conflict and establishment of communism. Karl Marx argued that society is fundamentally divided into classes based on economic position. In capitalism, the two main classes are 1. Bourgeoisie, owners of the means of production, factories, land, capital. 2. Proletariat, workers who sell their labor for wages. Marx believed that these classes have opposite interests, leading to class conflict. The bourgeoisie aims to maximize profit, while workers seek better wages and conditions. This inherent conflict drives historical change. As exploitation increases, workers become aware of their oppression and ultimately unite to overthrow capitalism. Marx described this process as revolution, where the proletariat seizes control of the means of production through collective struggle. After revolution, Marx argued that a transitional phase called the dictatorship of the proletariat would emerge, where the working class controls the state to eliminate inequalities and private property. Over time, the state will wither away, and society will reach its final stage: communism, a classless, stateless system where resources are shared according to need. Main features of communism: no private ownership of production, no social classes, economic equality, distribution according to need, collective decision-making. Example, the Russian Revolution of 1917, led by the Bolsheviks, demonstrated Marx's idea of class struggle where workers and peasants revolted against the aristocracy and capitalist classes. Although later developments differed from Marx's ideal, the revolution reflected the core idea of class conflict leading to systemic change. 6. Liberalism. Liberalism is a political philosophy that emphasizes individual freedom, equality, and limited government. It originated in Europe during the Enlightenment and advocates that people should have the liberty to think, speak, practice religion, trade, and participate in politics with minimum interference from the state. At its core, liberalism values individual rights, rule of law, and constitutionalism. Traditional liberalism focused mainly on civil and political rights, such as freedom of speech, property rights, and protection from arbitrary state power. It argued that government's primary duty is to protect individual liberties, not to directly intervene in social or economic matters. Over time, as societies industrialized, liberalism evolved. Thinkers recognized that freedom is meaningless if people lack basic economic and social security. This led to modern or welfare liberalism, which supports limited state intervention to ensure education, health, and equal opportunities. Key features: individual freedom, equality before law, limited but responsible government, constitutional democracy, market economy with reasonable regulation, protection of human rights. Example, the Indian Constitution reflects liberal ideas such as fundamental rights, equality before law, and freedom of speech. The judiciary also protects individual liberties through writ jurisdiction under Article 32 and 226, showing the strong influence of liberal philosophy. 7. Shift from negative liberalism to positive liberalism. Negative liberalism emphasizes the idea of freedom from state interference. It argues that individuals should be left alone and allowed to pursue their interests without government control. This view was popular in the 17th to 19th centuries and focused mainly on civil liberties, private property rights, and free markets. Government interference in economic and social life was considered harmful. However, negative liberalism came under criticism because it ignored real inequalities. Merely removing state restrictions did not help the poor, illiterate, or socially disadvantaged. This led to the emergence of positive liberalism, which focuses on freedom to access education, health, employment, and a decent standard of living. Positive liberalism supports state intervention to create conditions where people can truly exercise their freedoms. Key features of positive liberalism: welfare state, social justice, regulation of economy, protection of workers' rights, public education and health care, reduction of inequalities. In this model, the state does not dominate individuals but helps them develop their potential. Freedom is meaningful only when basic needs are met. Example: the Indian Constitution reflects positive liberalism through directive principles of state policy, DPSPs, such as Article 39, fair distribution of wealth, Article 41, right to work and education, and Article 47, public health. Welfare schemes like MNREGA and right to education also show the shift towards positive liberalism. 8. Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is an ethical and political theory developed by Jeremy Bentham and later expanded by John Stuart Mill. It argues that the right action or policy is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number. In simple terms, actions are judged based on their consequences, not intentions. If the outcome increases overall happiness or reduces suffering, it is considered morally right. Utilitarianism is grounded in human psychology, the belief that people naturally seek pleasure and avoid pain. Therefore, law and government should aim to maximize social welfare. This theory greatly influenced modern legal reforms, criminal justice, and public policy. Key principles: consequentialism, outcomes determine morality. Pleasure and pain as measures of right and wrong. Equality of interests, everyone's happiness counts equally. Focus on social welfare and utility. Rational calculation of benefits and harms. Critics argue that utilitarianism may justify sacrificing individual rights for majority benefit. For instance, punishing an innocent person to prevent riots may technically increase overall happiness but violates justice. Example: public vaccination programs reflect utilitarian reasoning. Even if a small number experience side effects, vaccinating millions prevents widespread disease, thus maximizing overall well-being. Similarly, traffic regulations and public health laws rely on utilitarian logic. 9. Main features of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism has several distinct features that shape its ethical and political influence. The first feature is consequentialism, meaning actions are judged solely by their results. Good actions are those that produce more happiness than suffering. Second, utilitarianism treats happiness and pain as measurable quantities. Thus, morality can be calculated in practical terms. Third, it emphasizes impartiality. Every person's happiness counts equally, regardless of social status. Fourth, it promotes collective welfare. The aim is the greatest happiness for the greatest number, not individual satisfaction. Fifth, utilitarianism supports rational decision-making. Lawmakers should evaluate policies based on their utility to society. Sixth, Utilitarianism is flexible and can adapt to changing circumstances. There are no fixed moral rules. What matters is maximizing overall well-being. 7th, it influenced democratic governance, penal reforms, and economic policies by promoting efficiency, public good, and rationality. Example, consider banning harmful drugs. Even though some individuals may want the freedom to use them, the overall harm health issues, crime, addiction reduces societal welfare. So, the government bans harmful substances in the interest of the majority. This represents utilitarian reasoning in lawmaking. 10. Bentham's view on calculation of pleasure and types of pleasure. Jeremy Bentham proposed the hedonic calculus, a method for measuring pleasure and pain to determine the moral value of actions. According to Bentham, pleasure and pain can be quantified based on certain criteria. He identified 7 factors. 1. Intensity, strength of pleasure. 2. Duration, how long it lasts. 3. Certainty, likelihood of the pleasure occurring. 4. Propinquity, how soon it will occur. 5. Fecundity, whether it leads to more pleasure. 6. Purity, how free it is from pain. 7. Extent, number of people affected. Bentham believed all pleasures are fundamentally equal and differ only in quantity, not quality. For him, physical pleasures and mental pleasures are both valid and measurable. This makes his approach practical and suitable for legal and governmental decisions. Types of pleasures. Physical pleasures, eating, comfort. Emotional pleasures, friendship, love. Intellectual pleasures, learning, creativity. All pleasures are judged using the same scale. Bentham's ideas influenced criminal law reforms. He believed punishments should cause just enough pain to deter crime but no more than necessary. Example, when deciding whether to impose a fine or imprisonment, lawmakers may evaluate which punishment will produce the most benefit and least harm to society. A fine may achieve the objective without causing excessive suffering, aligning with Bentham's calculus. 11. Mill and Bentham, a comparative study. Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill were key figures in utilitarianism, but their ideas differed significantly. Bentham believed that all pleasures are equal and should be measured quantitatively. He focused on the amount of pleasure, not its quality. His approach was mathematical and practical, suitable for legal and administrative decision-making. Mill criticized this view. He argued that pleasures differ in quality, not just quantity. According to Mill, intellectual and moral pleasures, reading, music, knowledge, are superior to mere physical pleasures. He famously stated, "It is better to be a human dissatisfied than a pig satisfied," emphasizing human dignity and higher values. Comparison. Pleasure, Bentham quantitative, Mill qualitative. Focus, Bentham sensory pleasures, Mill intellectual pleasures. Human nature, Bentham saw humans as pleasure-seeking, Mill saw them as capable of moral growth. Democracy, Mill supported individual rights strongly and warned against tyranny of the majority. Law, Bentham was more concerned with legal reforms, Mill with protecting liberty. Example, in criminal law, Bentham would justify punishment purely based on deterrence and utility, while Mill would also consider whether the punishment respects human dignity and individual rights. 12. Socialism. Socialism is a socio-economic philosophy that emphasizes collective ownership, social equality, and reduction of economic disparities. Unlike capitalism, where private individuals control major resources, socialism supports public or cooperative ownership of industries to ensure wealth is distributed more fairly. The core belief is that society should function for the benefit of all, not merely the wealthy. The state may intervene in the economy to regulate prices, protect workers, and provide essential services like healthcare and education. Socialism values cooperation over competition and aims to eliminate exploitation arising from capitalist systems. Main features: public or collective ownership, economic planning, social welfare and equality, workers' rights and protections, reduction of class differences, welfare state policies. Socialism influenced many labor laws, welfare programs, and educational reforms globally. Critics argue that excessive state control may reduce efficiency and individual freedom. However, modern socialism often blends with democratic principles, leading to democratic socialism. Example, in India, public sector institutions like LIC, ONGC, and public health services reflect socialist principles. These institutions aim to serve the public rather than generate profit. 13. Socialism's influence on the Indian Constitution. Socialism has significantly shaped the Indian Constitution. Although the original Constitution did not explicitly use the word socialist, the 42nd Constitutional Amendment, 1976, inserted it into the preamble, reflecting India's commitment to social and economic justice. Several provisions highlight socialist influence. Directive Principles of State Policy, DPSPs, promote equitable distribution of wealth, workers' rights, and social welfare, Articles 38, 39, 41, 42, 43. Land reforms and abolition of zamindari reduced concentration of land ownership. Nationalization of major industries like banks and insurance promoted collective welfare. Fundamental rights, including right to equality, Article 14, and right to life, Article 21, ensure dignity and social justice. Welfare schemes such as MNREGA, right to education, and right to food reflect socialist ideals. The Constitution aims to create a society where opportunities are equal, and resources are distributed fairly. The state is empowered to regulate the economy and take steps to uplift weaker sections. Example, Article 39, b, which promotes distribution of wealth for the common good, was used in the Kesavananda Bharti and Minerva Mills cases to justify welfare-oriented legislation. This clearly shows how socialism influences constitutional interpretation. 14. Gandhian thought. Gandhian thought is based on simple living, moral courage, truth, and nonviolence. Gandhi believed that true freedom lies in self-discipline and purity of character. His philosophy is not only political but also spiritual and ethical. Gandhi emphasized village self-governance, decentralization of power, and upliftment of the poorest. Key elements of Gandhian thought: Satya, truth, commitment to honesty; Ahimsa, nonviolence, avoiding harm in thought, word, and action; self-reliance, Swadeshi; trusteeship, wealth as a social responsibility; Sarvodaya, welfare of all; simple living and moral purity. Gandhi's ideas influenced India's freedom struggle through nonviolent mass movements, civil disobedience, and constructive programs like promoting khadi, sanitation, and education. Example, Gandhi's Salt Satyagraha demonstrated his belief in peaceful civil resistance. It mobilized millions without violence and became a global example of moral protest. 15. Truth and nonviolence as pillars of Satyagraha. Satyagraha is Gandhi's method of resisting injustice through peaceful means. It rests on two central pillars: truth and nonviolence. Truth, Satya, means recognizing what is morally right, regardless of personal cost. Gandhi believed that truth is absolute and should guide all actions. A Satyagrahi must be truthful in speech, conduct, and intentions. Nonviolence, Ahimsa, means refusing to harm others physically or mentally. Gandhi saw nonviolence as an active force, not passive submission. It requires courage, patience, and discipline. Violence may produce immediate results but leads to hatred and further conflict. Nonviolence appeals to the conscience of the oppressor and aims to transform both sides. Satyagraha involves civil disobedience, non-cooperation, and fasting, but without hatred toward the opponent. It seeks to win justice with moral force rather than coercion. Example, during the civil disobedience movement, Gandhi urged people to peacefully defy unjust laws like the salt tax. Despite arrests and repression, the movement remained largely nonviolent, showing how truth and nonviolence can become powerful tools for political change. 16. Gandhian techniques of resistance against unjust laws. Gandhi developed several nonviolent techniques to challenge unjust laws and oppressive rule. These techniques were based on moral courage and aimed at transforming the opponent rather than destroying them. 1. Civil disobedience, deliberate and peaceful violation of unjust laws. Example, Salt Satyagraha, where people broke the British monopoly on salt. 2. Non-cooperation, refusing to support oppressive systems, such as boycotting foreign goods, British schools, courts, and titles during the non-cooperation movement. 3. Boycott, economic and social withdrawal from oppressive institutions. 4. Picketing and peaceful demonstrations, used to protest unfair taxes or discriminatory practices. 5. Fasting, a method of self-purification and moral appeal to bring change. 6. Constructive programs, promoting khadi, rural education, sanitation, and social harmony to strengthen society from within. Gandhi believed that unjust laws should be resisted without hatred. The aim is to awaken the conscience of the rulers and empower people to assert their rights peacefully. Example, during the Champaran Satyagraha, Gandhi used persuasion, non-cooperation, and peaceful protest to compel British authorities to abolish forced indigo cultivation. This demonstrated the success of Gandhian techniques in combating injustice. 17. Gandhism and Marxism, comparative study. Although both Gandhism and Marxism aim to remove exploitation, they differ fundamentally in philosophy, method, and vision. Marxism views history as a series of class struggles. It believes exploitation arises from private ownership of means of production. Marx advocated violent revolution to overthrow capitalism and establish a classless, communist society. Human progress, according to Marx, is material and economic. Gandhism, in contrast, emphasizes moral and spiritual development. Gandhi believed that exploitation arises from greed, not merely ownership. He rejected violence and promoted nonviolent resistance, truth, and self-discipline. Instead of abolishing private property, Gandhi proposed trusteeship, where wealth is used for social welfare. Key differences. Means, Marxism violence, Gandhism nonviolence. End goal, Marxism classless society, Gandhism harmonious society. View of the state, Marx state will disappear, Gandhi state should be minimal and ethical. Economic approach, Marx collective ownership, Gandhi decentralized village economy. Example, while Marxists support workers using force to overthrow employers, Gandhi encouraged peaceful strikes and negotiations to address exploitation. This highlights their contrasting approaches to social change. 18. State of nature and social contract, John Locke. John Locke described the state of nature as a condition where humans lived without a formal government but still possessed natural rights such as life, liberty, and property. Unlike Hobbes, Locke believed the state of nature was peaceful and guided by reason, which acted as the law of nature. However, problems arose because there was no neutral judge to settle disputes, and individuals could misuse their freedom. To overcome these limitations, Locke proposed the idea of a social contract. People voluntarily agreed to form a political society and create a government to protect their natural rights. The government received power from the consent of the governed. This means political authority is not absolute but limited. If the government fails to protect rights or becomes tyrannical, people have the right to replace or overthrow it. Key features. Natural rights are inherent and cannot be surrendered. Government is created to protect life, liberty, and property. Consent of the people is the basis of political authority. Right to revolt against unjust government. Example, India's constitution reflects Locke's ideas. Fundamental rights protect life, liberty, and property, Article 21 and Article 300A. The democratic system, based on consent of the people, and judicial review against arbitrary laws reflect Locke's social contract principles. 19. Thomas Hobbes' view on political obligation. Thomas Hobbes viewed the state of nature as a condition of chaos, competition, and fear, famously describing it as a state where life was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. To escape constant insecurity, individuals entered into a social contract, surrendering all their rights, except the right to life, to a sovereign authority. According to Hobbes, political obligation arises from this contract. Individuals must obey the sovereign completely because only a powerful authority can maintain peace and prevent civil war. The sovereign, whether a king or an assembly, holds absolute power. Disobedience is justified only if the sovereign directly threatens a person's life, because the right to self-preservation cannot be surrendered. Key features of Hobbes' political obligation. Obedience ensures security and order. Sovereign is absolute and cannot be legally challenged. Subjects cannot revolt unless their life is endangered. Law is the command of the sovereign. Morality depends on obedience to law. Example, during emergencies or internal conflicts, governments often acquire extraordinary powers. Hobbes' theory explains why citizens must obey strict measures such as curfews, restrictions, or security laws because they ensure stability and prevent disorder. 20. Rousseau's perception of the general will. Jean-Jacques Rousseau introduced the idea of the general will, which refers to the collective interest or common good of all people in a political community. The general will is not the sum of individual desires but the will that aims at the welfare of all. It expresses what is best for society as a whole, even if individuals disagree with it. Rousseau argued that true political authority arises when people collectively participate in forming this general will. Citizens are both the makers and subjects of law, ensuring equality and freedom. The general will is always right and cannot be unjust because it is guided by the common good. Key features. Represents collective interest, not individual preference. Foundation of legitimate political authority. Ensures equality and moral freedom. Laws must reflect the general will. Citizens must participate in decision-making. However, Rousseau warned against the will of all, which is simply a majority opinion and can be influenced by private interests. Example, the idea of the general will can be seen in the Indian Constitution's commitment to public goods such as welfare schemes and laws promoting equality even if some groups oppose them. Democratic decisions like reservations or environmental protections reflect Rousseau's belief that laws should serve the larger public interest. 21. Power and authority, comparative study. Power refers to the ability of one person or institution to influence or control the actions of others. It may rely on force, coercion, or resources. Power can exist even without legal approval. For example, a criminal gang may exercise power through fear. Authority, however, is power that is legitimate and accepted by society. It is recognized as rightful, lawful, and morally justified. Authority does not rely on fear. People obey because they believe the rule is legitimate. Differences. Source: power can come from force, Authority comes from legitimacy. Nature, power is external. Authority is internal acceptance. Stability, power based on coercion is unstable. Authority lasts longer. Obedience, power commands obedience through fear. Authority through consent. Type, authority is institutional. Power can be personal or social. Both power and authority are essential for governance. A state must have power to implement decisions and authority to ensure people obey willingly. Example, the police have authority because the Constitution and laws grant them legitimate powers. However, if a police officer uses force illegally, that becomes power without authority, which is not acceptable in a constitutional democracy. 22. Max Weber's classification of authority. Max Weber identified 3 types of authority that explain why people obey rulers. 1. Traditional authority. This authority is based on customs, traditions, and long-standing beliefs. People obey because things have always been done this way. Examples include kings, tribal chiefs, or feudal lords. Legitimacy comes from tradition. 2. Charismatic authority. This stems from the personal charisma, charm, or heroism of a leader. People follow the leader because they believe in their extraordinary qualities. Examples include Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, or religious prophets. This type of authority is unstable because it depends on personal charisma. 3. Legal rational authority. This authority is based on laws, rules, and formal procedures. People obey offices, not individuals. Modern states, bureaucracies, and democratic institutions function under this type. Authority comes from legal legitimacy. Key features. Helps understand different leadership styles. Explains transition from traditional societies to modern bureaucratic states. Shows the role of legitimacy in obedience. Example, in India, the Prime Minister's authority is legal rational, derived from the Constitution. But leaders like Gandhi gained charismatic authority, showing how Weber's types can coexist. 23. Significance of legitimacy in the exercise of political power. Legitimacy means public acceptance of the authority of a ruler or government. A government is legitimate when people believe it has the right to rule. Legitimacy ensures voluntary obedience, reduces the need for force, and strengthens political stability. Without legitimacy, power becomes coercive and unstable. People obey out of fear, not respect. Legitimacy can arise from elections, constitutional rules, performance, moral justification, or historical tradition. A legitimate government enjoys public trust and can implement laws effectively. Significance. Ensures peaceful functioning of state institutions. Promotes political stability and reduces conflict. Enhances public cooperation with laws and policies. Increases accountability and transparency. Strengthens democratic governance. When legitimacy erodes due to corruption, authoritarianism, or misuse of power, citizens lose trust, leading to protests, instability, or regime change. Example, elections in India provide democratic legitimacy to governments. If a government loses public support, people can remove it through elections. This peaceful transfer of power demonstrates the central role of legitimacy in political systems. 24. T. H. Green's view on resistance to unjust laws. T. H. Green, a major liberal thinker, believed that the state exists to promote moral development and social welfare of individuals. Laws should help people realize their true potential and live a good life. When laws fulfill this purpose, citizens have a moral duty to obey them. However, Green argued that individuals also have the right to resist unjust laws, especially when laws violate moral principles or restrict human freedom. According to him, obedience is not blind, it is conditional upon the moral purpose of the law. If the state acts against public welfare or imposes oppressive regulations, resistance becomes morally justified. Key points. Purpose of law is moral upliftment. Political obligation is conditional, not absolute. Unjust laws lose moral authority. Citizens may use peaceful and responsible methods of resistance. Emphasis on moral conscience and public welfare. Green's view influenced modern democratic thought by linking political obligation with morality. Example, Gandhi's civil disobedience against colonial laws reflects Green's idea. The salt tax law was unjust and harmful to common people, therefore, resisting it peacefully was morally permissible. This alignment shows how Green's theory supports ethical resistance. 25. Elitist theory. Elitist theory argues that political power in every society, democratic or authoritarian, is controlled by a small group of elites. These elites hold leadership positions due to wealth, education, social status, military influence, or organizational skills. According to elitists, masses do not participate directly in decision-making. Instead, elites make decisions on their behalf. Thinkers like Mosca, Pareto, and Michaels argued that inequality in skills and resources naturally produces elites. Elites may differ in background, but they share common interests and maintain their dominance. Key features. Power is concentrated in the hands of a few. Political equality is limited in practice. Leadership arises from organizational ability. Circulation of elites occurs when old elites are replaced by new ones. Masses follow. Elites lead. Critics argue that elitism undermines democracy, but supporters claim that complex societies require skilled leadership. Example, in modern democracies, political parties, corporate leaders, bureaucrats, and media owners form influential elite groups who shape public policy. Even though elections exist, real decision-making often remains in elite circles. 26. Lion and fox-like elites, Vilfredo Pareto. Vilfredo Pareto classified elites into two types: lions and foxes, based on their style of rule. 1. Lion-like elites. These leaders use force, tradition, and authority to maintain order. They favor discipline, stability, and rigid rules. Lions rely on strength rather than persuasion. Military leaders, authoritarian rulers, and conservative elites fall into this category. 2. Fox-like elites. Foxes rely on intelligence, diplomacy, and manipulation. They use negotiation, cleverness, and flexible policies to maintain power. They avoid direct confrontation and prefer strategic compromise. Skilled politicians and diplomats represent fox-like elites. Pareto argued that power circulates between lions and foxes. When one type becomes ineffective, the other replaces it. This circulation of elites prevents stagnation in political systems. Example, during India's independence movement, Gandhi's strategy of negotiation and moral persuasion resembled fox-like leadership. In contrast, certain colonial officials relied on force, reflecting lion-like authority. The shift from British rule to democratic governance demonstrates circulation of elites. 27. Iron Law of Oligarchy, Robert Michaels. Robert Michaels proposed the Iron Law of Oligarchy, stating that all organizations, whether political parties, trade unions, or even democracies, tend to become controlled by a small group of leaders. This happens because large organizations require coordination, expertise, and decision-making skills that ordinary members may not possess. As leaders gain experience and control over resources, they become indispensable. Over time, they form an elite group that dominates the organization, making internal democracy difficult. According to Michaels, who says organization, says oligarchy. Key features. Leadership becomes permanent. Bureaucracy concentrates power. Members become passive and dependent on leaders. Leaders pursue their own interests. Internal democracy declines. Despite elections or open membership, true power often remains with a few leaders. Example, political parties in India often show oligarchic tendencies where a few families or top leaders control decision-making, candidates' election, and party agenda. This reflects Michaels's iron law and shows how democratic bodies can still become oligarchic. 28. Quasi-federal nature of the Indian Constitution / India as a quasi-federal state. The Indian Constitution is often described as quasi-federal because it combines features of both federalism and unitary government. A federal system normally divides power clearly between the center and states, but India's constitution gives the center stronger authority to maintain unity, stability, and national integration. Therefore, India is not fully federal like the USA, nor fully unitary. It is a unique blend. Federal features include a written constitution, rigid in certain parts, division of powers through union, state, and concurrent lists, dual government structure, independent judiciary, bicameral legislature at the center. Unitary features include strong center with dominance in lawmaking, emergency provisions giving sweeping powers to the union, governor's power to recommend president's rule, single constitution and single citizenship, all India services, IPS, controlled by center. This mixed structure ensures both stability and regional autonomy. India's size, diversity, and historical challenges required a system that allowed central strength while still respecting state interests. Example, during national emergencies, like the 1975 emergency, India operated almost as a unitary state. However, during normal times, states exercise significant autonomy over areas like police, agriculture, and public order. This demonstrates the quasi-federal nature of the Constitution. 29. Balance between judicial review and parliamentary supremacy. The Indian Constitution maintains a careful balance between judicial review, power of courts to strike down unconstitutional laws, and parliamentary supremacy, power of elected representatives to legislate. Unlike the UK, where Parliament is supreme, India gives both Parliament and the judiciary significant roles so neither becomes absolute. Judicial review. The Supreme Court and High Courts can review laws passed by Parliament and reject them if they violate the Constitution. This protects fundamental rights and ensures constitutional supremacy. Key cases like Kesavada and Dabardi establish that Parliament cannot amend the basic structure of the Constitution. Parliamentary supremacy. Parliament retains wide powers to make laws on subjects in the Union and concurrent lists. It can also amend the Constitution under Article 368, except destroying basic structure. As the elected body, Parliament reflects the democratic will of the people. Balance. Parliament can amend laws struck down by courts. Judiciary ensures Parliament does not cross constitutional limits. Both institutions function together to protect democracy. Example, after the Supreme Court struck down the National Judicial Appointments Commission, NJAC, as violating the basic structure, Parliament continued to legislate on judicial reforms within constitutional limits. This shows how both powers coexist in balance. 30. Main features of Indian political parties. Indian political parties play a major role in shaping democracy, governance, and public opinion. The Indian party system is diverse and dynamic due to cultural, social, and linguistic variations across the country. Main features. 1. Multi-party system. India has national parties, state parties, and regional parties. Example, BJP, Congress, DMK, TMC. 2. Ideological diversity. Party ideologies range from nationalism to socialism, regionalism, caste-based agendas, and secularism. 3. High party fragmentation. Coalition politics is common because no single party often gets a majority. 4. Leadership-centric structure. Many parties function around charismatic leaders or political families. 5. Regional parties' influence. States have powerful parties that shape national politics. Example: TRS, Shiv Sena. 6. Role in elections. Parties mobilize voters, select candidates, prepare manifestos, and form governments. 7. Weak internal democracy. Candidates' election and leadership decisions are often centralized. 8. Use of caste, religion, and identity in politics remains significant. While political parties facilitate representation, they also face issues like corruption, criminalization of politics, and dynastic tendencies. Example: coalition governments at the center between 1996 and 2014 show how Indian political parties operate within a multi-party system where alliances are essential for stability. 31. Challenges to Indian democracy. India is the world's largest democracy, but it faces several structural and social challenges. Major challenges include: corruption weakens trust in institutions and affects public services. Criminalization of politics. Many elected leaders face criminal charges, undermining democratic values. Caste and communal tensions. Identity-based politics often leads to division and violence. Poverty and inequality. Large sections of society lack equal political participation. Weak internal democracy in parties. Centralized leadership limits fair representation. Media biases and misinformation affect informed decision-making. Electoral violence and vote buying threaten free elections. Administrative inefficiency delays justice and development. Despite these challenges, democratic institutions, courts, election commission, free press help protect constitutional values. Example: the Election Commission's role in conducting fair elections, such as enforcing the Model Code of Conduct during national polls, shows how democratic safeguards work even when challenges exist. 32. Dignity of the individual as given in the preamble. The preamble of the Indian Constitution promises to secure the dignity of the individual to all citizens. Dignity refers to the inherent worth of every person, regardless of gender, caste, religion, or economic status. It means that every individual must be treated with respect, fairness, and equality. How dignity is protected. Fundamental rights safeguard personal liberty, equality, and freedom of expression. Article 21, right to life and personal liberty, has been interpreted broadly to include privacy, reputation, shelter, livelihood, and clean environment. Abolition of untouchability. Article 17, protects the dignity of marginalized communities. Right against exploitation protects workers and children from abuse. Social justice principles in directive principles aim at reducing inequality and ensuring humane living conditions. Dignity also includes the right to develop one's personality. Courts frequently use the concept of dignity to strike down laws that discriminate or restrict personal freedoms. Example: Injustice K.S. Putaswamy v. Union of India, 2017. The Supreme Court held that the right to privacy is part of Article 21 because privacy is essential for maintaining dignity. This judgment expanded the meaning of dignity to include autonomy over personal decisions such as marriage, sexuality, and lifestyle. 33. Socialism's influence on the Indian Constitution. Socialism aims at reducing economic inequality and ensuring social justice for all. Its main idea is that wealth and resources should be used for the benefit of society, not only for a few individuals. The Indian Constitution reflects strong socialist principles, even though India follows a mixed economy. The word socialist was added to the preamble through the 42nd Constitutional Amendment, 1976. However, Socialist ideas existed from the beginning. The Constitution adopted many provisions to promote equality, reduce poverty, and protect weaker sections. Main features of socialist influence. Directive principles of state policy, DPSP's Articles 38, 39, 41, 42, 43, and 47 promote equal distribution of wealth, workers' rights, education, health, and social welfare. Abolition of untouchability, Article 17, ensures social equality. Right to equality, Article 14, and right to life, Article 21, protect dignity and humane living conditions. Land reforms and zamindari abolition promoted economic justice. Nationalization of major sectors like banking and insurance reflected state control for public welfare. Welfare schemes like MREGA, right to education, food security programs, and subsidies reflect socialist goals of reducing inequality. Socialism in India is not rigid. It allows a balance between private enterprise and state intervention. The aim is to create a society where opportunities are equal and basic needs are met. Example, in Minerva Mills v. Union of India, the Supreme Court held that achieving social justice and reducing inequality core socialist principles are part of the basic structure of the Constitution. This shows how deeply socialism shapes constitutional interpretation. 34. Challenges to Indian democracy. India is the world's largest democracy, but it faces several political, social, and economic challenges that affect its functioning. Major challenges include 1. Corruption, misuse of public office weakens trust in governance and affects development. 2. Criminalization of politics, many elected representatives face criminal charges, reducing public faith in the system. 3. Caste and communal tensions, identity-based politics can lead to violence, discrimination, and political manipulation. 4. Poverty and inequality, large numbers of people lack access to education, healthcare, and employment, limiting their effective participation in democracy. 5. Weak internal democracy in political parties, leadership is often centralized, reducing transparency and free debate. 6. Media pressure and misinformation, fake news and biased reporting influence public opinion and elections. 7. Electoral malpractices, vote buying, booth capturing, and misuse of money power create unfair elections. 8. Administrative delays and corruption slow justice and service delivery. 9. Threats to freedom of expression, pressure on journalists and activists reduces democratic space. Despite these problems, strong institutions such as an independent judiciary, election commission, and free press help preserve democratic values. Example, the Election Commission's enforcement of the Model Code of Conduct during elections ensures fairness by regulating political campaigns, controlling hate speech, and monitoring spending. This shows how democratic institutions work to overcome challenges. Long answers. 1. Write a note on J.S. Mill's view on liberty. What is the impact of Mill's view on the Indian Constitution? Introduction. J.S. Mill, one of the most influential liberal philosophers of the 19th century, set out a powerful defense of individual freedom in his famous work on liberty, 1859. His theory was grounded in the idea that human progress depends on the protection of personal autonomy, free expression, and the ability to pursue one's own good. Mill's insights are especially relevant for legal studies because they shape modern constitutional thought, including the framework of rights in democratic societies such as India. The concept of liberty. Mill distinguishes between two major aspects of liberty. 1. Liberty of thought and expression. Mill argues that free expression is essential because truth emerges only when ideas right or wrong are openly debated. Suppressing opinions robs society of the opportunity to correct errors or refine existing truths. Example, in constitutional law, This idea supports the protection of dissent, academic freedom, and the press. 2. Liberty of action, individuality. Mill believes individuals should be free to shape their own lives, provided their actions do not harm others. He praises individuality as a source of social progress and human development. Example, rights such as choosing one's profession or lifestyle reflect this dimension. The harm principle. At the heart of Mill's theory is the harm principle, the idea that power can be exercised over an individual only to prevent harm to others. The state cannot restrict an individual's freedom merely because an action is immoral, unconventional, or disliked by society. This principle provides a limit on both legal authority and social pressure. Laws regulating public order, example, prohibiting hate speech or violent acts, align with the harm principle, while laws interfering in private moral choices, example, rights of consenting adults, should be scrutinized for unnecessary restrictions. Mill on authority and social tyranny. Mill warns not only against political tyranny but also social tyranny, the pressure of majority opinion that may stifle individuality. Legal systems must therefore protect minorities and unpopular opinions. This idea resonates with constitutional safeguards against majoritarian. Impact of Mill's view on the Indian Constitution. Mill's philosophy significantly influenced modern liberal democracies, including India. The Constitution embodies several of its principles. 1. Fundamental Rights, Part 3. Article 19, 1. A freedom of speech and expression reflects Mill's emphasis on open debate. Article 19, 1, c, and d. Freedom of association and movement support personal autonomy. Article 21, right to life and personal liberty has been interpreted expansively by the Supreme Court to include privacy, dignity, and autonomy, ideas closely aligned with Mill's defense of individuality. 2. Reasonable restrictions. The Constitution allows restrictions on rights only on specific grounds, such as security, public order, or morality. This resembles Mill's harm principle, which permits interference solely to prevent harm to others. 3. Judicial approach. Indian courts have repeatedly invoked values consistent with Mill's philosophy. For instance, in Putaswamy, 2017, the right to privacy was recognized as central to individual autonomy. In Naftej Chowar, 2018, the Supreme Court held that consensual adult relationships cannot be criminalized, reflecting Mill's protection of private conduct. Conclusion. J.S. Mill's theory of liberty remains the cornerstone of liberal thought, emphasizing freedom of expression, individuality, and limits on state authority. The Indian Constitution echoes these ideals by guaranteeing fundamental rights that promote personal autonomy while allowing restrictions only to protect public interest. Through judicial interpretation and constitutional design, Mill's influence continues to shape India's democratic and rights-based framework. 2. Write a note on J.S. Mill's classification of liberty and make a comparative study of J.S. Mill and Jeremy Bentham. Introduction. J.S. Mill, a prominent 19th-century liberal thinker, developed a systematic classification of liberty aimed at securing individual autonomy within a democratic society. His ideas emerged as a refinement of classical utilitarianism, modifying earlier perspectives advanced by Jeremy Bentham. Together, their theories form the foundation of modern legal and political thought, especially in the study of rights, justice, and the relationship between the individual and the state. J.S. Mill's classification of liberty. 1. Liberty of thought and expression. Mill places the highest value on freedom of thought and discussion. He argues that allowing diverse opinions, true or false, promotes intellectual and social progress. Suppressing ideas, according to Mill, deprives society of potential truth or the opportunity to correct prevailing errors. Constitutional protections of speech and dissent reflect this principle, essential for judicial reasoning in free speech cases. 2. Liberty of tastes and pursuits. Individuality. Mill emphasizes the freedom to choose one's lifestyle, preferences, moral choices, and personal goals. He believes individuality contributes to creativity and societal development. Example, choosing one's profession, educational path, or personal relationships falls under this liberty. 3. Liberty of association. Mill notes the importance of individuals forming voluntary groups for social, political, economic, or intellectual purposes, so long as the association does not harm others. Example, political parties, trade unions, and student organizations illustrate this form of liberty. The harm principle. Although not a separate type of liberty, the harm principle governs all forms of freedom in Mill's framework. The state may restrict liberty only to prevent harm to others, not to impose moral or majoritarian preferences. This principle shapes debates in criminal law, public order, and constitutional limitations. Comparative study, J.S. Mill and Jeremy Bentham. 1. Concept of liberty. Bentham viewed liberty mainly in legal terms, arguing that rights and freedoms must be defined and granted by law. He rejected natural rights as nonsense upon stilts. Mill treated liberty as a moral and political necessity for human development, emphasizing intrinsic individual autonomy beyond mere legal rights. 2. Utilitarianism. Bentham advocated quantitative utilitarianism, measuring pleasure and pain through a philosophic calculus. The greatest happiness meant the greatest number of pleasurable units. Mill introduced qualitative utilitarianism, asserting that higher pleasures, intellectual, moral, are superior to lower bodily pleasures. This was crucial in connecting liberty to human flourishing. 3. Role of the state. Bentham supported strong legal intervention when it increased overall utility, even if it limited individual liberty. Mill warned against both governmental and social tyranny. He allowed state interference only under the harm principle. 4. Individual versus society. Bentham prioritized collective welfare. The individual was secondary to social utility. Mill prioritized the individual, arguing that personal freedom ultimately benefits society. Bentham's approach influences legislative drafting and penal reforms, while Mill's ideas guide constitutional interpretation and rights jurisprudence. Conclusion. Mill's classification of liberty spanning thought, action, and association provides a comprehensive framework for understanding individual freedom. While both Mill and Bentham were utilitarians, Mill expanded the philosophy to emphasize qualitative values, moral autonomy, and limits on state authority. Their contrasting perspectives continue to influence modern legal systems, balancing societal welfare with the protection of fundamental rights. 3. Write a note on the harm principle of J.S. Mill. Discuss the impact of J.S. Mill's harm principle on the Indian Constitution. Introduction. J.S. Mill, in his foundational work on liberty, 1859, introduced the harm principle as the central justification for limiting individual freedom. His goal was to protect personal autonomy from both state oppression and social pressure while allowing reasonable restrictions only when an individual's actions threaten others. The principle has had a notable influence on modern liberal democracies, including constitutional frameworks such as India's. The harm principle of J.S. Mill. Meaning and core idea. The harm principle states that the only legitimate reason for society or the state to restrict an individual's liberty is to prevent harm to others. Mill argues that individuals are sovereign over their own body and mind, and interference is not justified merely because an action is immoral, unconventional, or disliked by the majority. Self-regarding versus other regarding actions. Mill distinguishes between two categories. 1. Self-regarding actions. These affect only the individual. Examples include lifestyle choices, consumption habits, or personal beliefs. Mill maintains that such actions should never be restricted. 2. Other regarding actions, these impact or threaten the rights and interests of others. In such cases, intervention is permissible. This distinction helps in analyzing whether legal provisions such as those dealing with public order, obscenity, or morality protect societal interests or excessively intrude on personal liberty. Importance of autonomy and individuality. Mill views liberty as essential for human development. By allowing individuals to freely experiment with their choices, society benefits through diversity, innovation, and critical thinking. Coercion, especially on moral grounds, suppresses individuality and harms collective progress. Limits of state and social authority. The harm principle sets boundaries not only for legal authority but also for social norms. Mill warns that majority opinion can become tyrannical, pressuring individuals to conform. Therefore, protecting personal freedom is vital in democratic societies where majoritarian may dominate. Impact of J.S. Mill's harm principle on the Indian Constitution. Fundamental rights framework. The Indian Constitution incorporates Mill's philosophy through rights that safeguard individual freedom while allowing reasonable restrictions. Article 19, 1a-G guarantees freedom such as speech, movement, assembly, and profession, which can be restricted only for public order, security, or the rights of others reflecting the harm-based justification. Article 21, the right to life and personal liberty has been expansively interpreted to include dignity, privacy, and autonomy, aligning closely with Mill's emphasis on personal sovereignty. Judicial interpretation. Indian courts have often adopted reasoning consistent with Mill's principle. K.S. Puttaswamy, 2017 recognized privacy as a fundamental right, stressing that the state cannot intrude into personal choices without strong justification. Naftej Johar, 2018 decriminalized consensual same-sex relations, holding that private acts between adults do not harm others and therefore cannot be criminalized. Shafanjahan, Hadiya case, 2018 affirmed the right to choose one's partner, reinforcing the idea of personal autonomy in self-regarding matters. Balancing liberty and social interest. The Constitution acknowledges that liberty is not absolute. Restrictions are permitted when actions threaten public order, national security, or the rights of others, mirroring Mill's category of other regarding actions. Conclusion. The harm principle remains a powerful liberal doctrine focused on limiting coercive authority and safeguarding autonomy. Its influence is visible in the Indian constitutional structure, which balances freedom with societal interests through reasonable restrictions. Judicial interpretations have further reinforced Mill's vision by protecting privacy, dignity, and individual choice. Thus, Mill's principle continues to shape India's discourse on rights and liberty in contemporary legal and constitutional practice. 4. What are the basic principles of utilitarianism? Compare the utilitarianism of J. Bentham with the philosophy of J.S. Mill. Introduction. Utilitarianism is a consequentialist ethical theory that judges the moral value of an action by its outcomes. Originating in the works of Jeremy Bentham and later refined by J.S. Mill, it seeks to promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number. In legal and political philosophy, utilitarianism has played an important role in shaping ideas related to lawmaking, punishment, and social welfare. Basic principles of utilitarianism. 1. Principle of utility, greatest happiness principle. The core idea is that actions are right if they promote happiness, pleasure, and wrong if they produce pain or suffering. Happiness is considered the ultimate good. 2. Consequentialism. The morality of an action depends solely on its consequences, not motives or inherent nature. The right action is the one with the best overall results. 3. Hedonism. Utilitarianism assumes that pleasure and absence of pain are the only intrinsic goods. All other values, wealth, knowledge, health, are instrumentally good because they produce pleasure. 4. Impartiality and universality. Every person's happiness counts equally. No individual's pleasure is inherently more important than another's, which supports democratic and egalitarian principles. 5. Aggregation of utility. Utilitarianism evaluates the total sum of happiness produced. An action or policy is justified if it maximizes overall social welfare. Legislatures often use utilitarian reasoning in public policy, such as taxation, welfare schemes, and criminal punishment. Comparison between Bentham's utilitarianism and Mill's philosophy. 1. Quantitative versus qualitative utilitarianism. Bentham emphasized quantitative assessment of pleasure. All pleasures are equal in quality. They differ only in intensity, duration, and other measurable factors. His philosophic calculus attempted to mathematically evaluate pleasure. Mill asserted that some pleasures, intellectual, moral, aesthetic, are superior in quality to bodily pleasures. He famously argued that it is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. 2. View on individual rights and liberty. Bentham viewed rights as products of law and utility. He rejected natural rights as nonsense upon stilts. Mill placed strong emphasis on individual liberty and autonomy. His harm principle protects personal freedoms unless they harm others. 3. Role of the state. Bentham supported extensive state intervention if it increased overall happiness. The state could limit individual freedom for utilitarian benefit. Mill warned against excessive state or social interference. Individual freedom is essential for personal and societal progress. 4. Purpose of morality. Bentham, primarily concerned with maximizing pleasure through clear legal rules and social reforms. Mill focused on moral and intellectual development, arguing that higher pleasures contribute more meaningfully to human flourishing. 5. Approach to law and justice. Bentham, his utilitarianism influenced legal positivism and reforms in criminal law, prison systems, and evidence law. Mill, his ideas shaped modern liberal constitutionalism, including notions of free speech, minority rights, and limits on majority rule. Conclusion. Utilitarianism seeks to maximize overall happiness and remains one of the most influential moral and political theories. While Bentham introduced a systematic, quantitative model centered on measurable pleasure, Mill refined it by highlighting qualitative differences and placing greater emphasis on liberty and human development. Their contrasting ideas continue to inform debates on legal policy, constitutional rights, and the balance between societal welfare and individual freedom. 5. Discuss the contribution of Jeremy Bentham to utilitarianism. Introduction. Jeremy Bentham, 1748-1832, is widely regarded as the founding father of classical utilitarianism. His ideas transformed moral and legal philosophy by grounding ethics in empirical observation and rational calculation. Bentham sought to replace abstract theories of natural rights with a scientific approach to law and policy making based on promoting human happiness. His contributions shaped modern jurisprudence, administrative reforms, and democratic thought. Bentham's major contributions to utilitarianism. 1. Formulation of the principle of utility. Bentham provided the first systematic statement of the principle of utility, also known as the greatest happiness principle. According to him, the moral worth of an action is determined by its tendency to produce pleasure or avoid pain. This principle became the foundation of all utilitarian thought and offered a clear, rational basis for ethical and legal evaluation. 2. Hedonistic calculus, philosophic calculus. One of Bentham's most distinctive contributions was his attempt to measure pleasure and pain scientifically. He identified several criteria: intensity, duration, certainty, propinquity, fecundity, purity, and extent through which the utility of an action could be calculated. This quantitative approach aimed to guide legislators in drafting laws that maximize societal welfare. 3. Rejection of natural rights theory. Bentham famously described natural rights as nonsense upon stilts. He argued that rights must be created by law, not by nature or custom. This perspective grounded his utilitarianism in legal positivism, shifting emphasis from abstract moral claims to practical legal reforms aimed at maximizing happiness. 4. Influence on law reform and codification. Bentham believed that laws should be clear, rational, and systematically codified. His utilitarian principles influenced reforms in criminal law, evidence law, and prison administration. His proposals contributed to the modern understanding of proportional and deterrent punishment. For example, he advocated for reforming harsh penal laws by evaluating their utility in reducing crime rather than relying on tradition or morality. 5. Democratic and administrative reforms. Bentham supported representative democracy, universal suffrage, separation of powers, and transparency in government. He believed that political institutions should be designed to maximize public welfare. His utilitarian framework influenced modern administrative law and public policy by emphasizing accountability and efficiency. 6. Emphasis on equality and impartiality. Bentham insisted that everybody is to count for one, and nobody for more than one, representing one of the earliest articulations of egalitarian ethics. His principle of equal consideration of interests became a core element of modern utilitarianism and democratic theory. Conclusion. Jeremy Bentham's contributions laid the intellectual foundation of utilitarianism by creating a unified, rational, and quantitative system for evaluating human actions and laws. His emphasis on the principle of utility, the philosophic calculus, legal positivism, codification of laws, and democratic reforms shaped modern jurisprudence and public policy. Although later thinkers like J.S. Mill refined and modified Bentham's ideas, Bentham's utilitarianism remains a cornerstone of moral and political philosophy, influencing contemporary legal systems and ethical debates. 6. Write a note on the reformative theory of punishment. What is the view of Jeremy Bentham on punishment? Introduction. Punishment is a central concept in criminal jurisprudence, and various theories attempt to justify why society punishes offenders. Among them, the reformative, or rehabilitative, theory stands out as a modern, humanistic approach that seeks to transform offenders into responsible members of society. Jeremy Bentham, a leading utilitarian philosopher, contributed significantly to penology by emphasizing that punishment should serve the greater good and should never be inflicted unnecessarily. His views align with some aspects of reformative thinking while remaining grounded in utility. Reformative theory of punishment. 1. Core idea. The reformative theory asserts that the primary purpose of punishment is to reform, rehabilitate, and reintegrate the offender rather than inflict pain or seek vengeance. Crime is often viewed as the result of social, psychological, or economic factors, and therefore, treatment and education can address the root causes. 2. Focus on the offender, not the offense. Instead of emphasizing retribution or deterrence alone, the reformative approach treats the criminal as a person capable of change. This perspective promotes compassion, counseling, and correctional programs. 3. Methods of reformation. Education and vocational training to enable lawful earning post-release. Counseling and psychological treatment for behavioral change. Open prisons and probation to gradually reintegrate offenders into society. Parole systems that reward good conduct and motivate improvement. Indian criminal justice incorporates reformative elements through the Probation of Offenders Act, Juvenile Justice Act, parole rules, and rehabilitative prison practices. 4. Strengths of the reformative approach. Reduces recidivism by transforming behavior. encourages humane treatment consistent with constitutional values. Example, Articles 21 and 14 in India. Aims to create a safer society by preventing future crimes. Jeremy Bentham's view on punishment. 1. Punishment as an evil. Bentham argued that all punishment is in itself an evil because it inflicts pain. Therefore, it is morally justified only when it prevents greater harm. His approach is rooted in the principle of utility. Punishment must produce more happiness than suffering for society as a whole. 2. Justification through utility. Punishment is permissible only when it meets one of the following objectives: preventing the offender from repeating the crime, incapacitation; deterring others from committing similar offenses, general deterrence; influencing the offender's will so they choose lawful conduct in the future, specific deterrence. Bentham thus supports punishment as a necessary tool for social welfare, but only with strict justification. 3. Proportionality and rationality. Bentham insisted that punishment must be proportionate to the crime, certain and consistent, and designed to maximize deterrence while minimizing suffering. This rational, systematic approach influenced modern penal codes and sentencing policies. 4. Linked to reformative thought. Although primarily utilitarian, Bentham acknowledged that punishment should aim to reform the offender where possible. The idea of improving the criminal's future behavior aligns with the reformative model, though his justification is based on societal utility rather than moral compassion. Conclusion. The reformative theory of punishment emphasizes transformation over retribution, reflecting modern values of dignity, rehabilitation, and social reintegration. Jeremy Bentham's utilitarian perspective complements this approach by asserting that punishment should serve the greater good and be used only when necessary to prevent harm. His views on proportionality, rationality, and utility continue to shape contemporary criminal justice systems and sentencing philosophies worldwide. 7. What is the theory of surplus value as given by Karl Marx? What are the defects of Marxism? Make an evaluation of Marxism. Introduction. Karl Marx remains one of the most influential thinkers in political and economic theory. His analysis of capitalism, especially the theory of surplus value, forms the core of his critique of industrial society. Marxism also presents a broader ideological framework that seeks to transform society through class struggle and the establishment of a classless order. However, Marxism has been subject to significant criticism, both theoretical and practical. Theory of surplus value. 1. Meaning of surplus value. The theory of surplus value explains how capitalists extract profit from the labor of workers. According to Marx, workers are paid wages equal only to the value necessary for their subsistence, not the full value of what they produce. The difference between the value produced by labor and the wage received is called surplus value, which becomes the capitalist's profit. 2. Labor as the source of value. Marx argues that the value of a commodity is determined by the socially necessary labor time required for its production. Since labor alone adds value, surplus value arises when workers produce more value than they are paid for. 3. Exploitation of the working class. Surplus value is the basis of exploitation in capitalist societies. The capitalist owns the means of production and appropriates the surplus, while workers are alienated from both the product and the process of production. 4. Forms of surplus value. Absolute surplus value, increasing working hours without increasing wages. Relative surplus value, increasing productivity through technology so that more value is extracted in the same time. Marx's theory informs labor law reforms, minimum wage debates, and the regulation of working conditions. Defects of Marxism. 1. Economic determinism. Marx places excessive emphasis on economic factors, neglecting cultural, political, and psychological influences on human behavior. 2. Failure of proletarian revolution predictions. Marx predicted inevitable revolutions in advanced capitalist societies. Instead, many revolutions occurred in less developed regions, and capitalist societies adapted through welfare policies and labor rights. 3. Neglect of individual rights. Marxism prioritizes collective ownership and class interests, often undermining personal liberty, political freedom, and individual rights in practice. 4. Inefficient centralized planning. Marxist economies, especially in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, suffered from bureaucratic inefficiency, lack of innovation, and resource misallocation. 5. Classless society unrealist. The promised classless society never materialized. Instead, new ruling elites, party bureaucrats, emerged, contradicting the idea of equality. 6. Suppression of dissent. Historically, Marxist regimes often limited free speech, opposition, and democratic participation, contradictions to Marx's vision of human emancipation. Evaluation of Marxism. Strengths. Powerful critique of capitalism. Marx exposes exploitation, inequality, and alienation inherent in capitalist production. Influence on social justice movements, labor laws, trade unionism, welfare state policies, and anti-colonial movements were shaped by Marxist ideas. Historical materialism offers a systematic method for analyzing social change through class struggle. Weaknesses. Overemphasis on class conflict, ignores cooperation, institutions, and gradual reforms that shape social progress. Practical failures. Marxist states often fail to uphold democracy, efficiency, and economic growth. Rigid ideology leaves little room for pluralism and individual autonomy. Balanced view. Marxism remains valuable as a critical theory but less successful as a governing model. While its insights into inequality and social injustice are still relevant, historical experiences suggest that a mixed approach combining market systems with social welfare better serves modern societies. Conclusion. Marx's theory of surplus value is central to understanding his critique of capitalist exploitation. While Marxism has contributed significantly to political theory, labor rights, and social reform, it also suffers from ideological rigidity, practical shortcomings, and historical failures. An evaluation of Marxism shows that its true strength lies in its analytical power to expose structural inequality, even though its proposed alternative of a classless society has not succeeded in practice. 8. Explain Karl Marx's view on class and class conflict. Introduction. Karl Marx's theory of class and class conflict forms the foundation of his critique of capitalism and his vision of historical change. He believed that society is fundamentally shaped by economic relations, and these relations give rise to distinct social classes with opposing interests. According to Marx, history progresses through the struggle between these classes, ultimately leading to revolutionary transformation. Marx's concept of class. 1. Basis of class, relations of production. Marx defines classes not by income or status but by their relationship to the means of production. Those who own the means of production, land, factories, machinery, form the ruling class. Those who do not own them and must sell their labor are the working class. 2. Major classes in capitalism. Bourgeoisie, the capitalist class that owns the means of production. Their power stems from control over capital and the purchase of labor. Proletariat, the working class that sells labor power for wages. They do not control production and are therefore exploited. 3. Exploitation through surplus value. Marx argues that exploitation occurs because the worker produces more value than the wage paid. The difference surplus value is appropriated by the capitalist, creating inherent conflict between the classes. 4. Class consciousness. Class does not exist only in economic terms but also in awareness. Class in itself, a group sharing the same economic position. Class for itself, a class that becomes aware of its common interests and organizes to challenge oppression. Marx believed that as exploitation intensifies, the proletariat would develop class consciousness. Marx's theory of class conflict. 1. Conflict as the engine of history. According to Marx, the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Social change occurs not through ideas alone but through conflicts between classes with opposing economic interests. 2. Conflict under capitalism. Capitalism intensifies class conflict because the bourgeoisie seeks to maximize profit. The proletariat seeks better wages and working conditions. Since their aims are incompatible, conflict is inevitable. 3. Polarization of classes. Marx argued that capitalism leads to the concentration of wealth among fewer capitalists and increasing poverty among workers. This polarization creates the conditions for revolutionary conflict. 4. Revolution and the abolition of class. Marx predicted that class conflict would culminate in a proletarian revolution. Workers would overthrow capitalism, establish a socialist state, and eventually create a classless, stateless society where the means of production are collectively owned. Evaluation of Marx's theory. Labor laws, trade union movements, and welfare state policies reflect Marx's emphasis on protecting workers from exploitation. Many sociologists argue that modern societies have more complex class structures beyond a two-class model. Despite criticisms, Marx's focus on inequality, exploitation, and power relations remains influential in legal studies, political science, and economics. Conclusion. Karl Marx's theory of class and class conflict provides a powerful framework for understanding social inequality and historical change. By grounding class in economic relations and identifying conflict as central to societal transformation, Marx offers a compelling analysis of capitalism and its contradictions. His ideas continue to shape contemporary debates on labor rights, social justice, and economic reform. 9. Why Karl Marx regarded power as class power and as a temporary phenomenon. Discuss the main features of the Marxian theory of political obligation. Introduction. Karl Marx's political theory is rooted in his broader critique of capitalism and historical materialism. For Marx, political institutions, law, and the state are not neutral but instruments shaped by economic structures. Power, therefore, is inseparable from class relations. He viewed both political power and political obligation as reflections of the dominant class's interests, destined to disappear once class divisions are abolished. Why Marx regarded power as class power. 1. Power as an instrument of the ruling class. Marx argued that political power is essentially class power. In every historical epoch, the class that controls the means of production also controls the state and its institutions. Under capitalism, the bourgeoisie uses political power to protect private property, maintain labor exploitation, and secure economic dominance. Thus, the state functions as a committee for managing the common affairs of the bourgeoisie. 2. The state as a superstructure. According to Marx's materialist conception of history, economic relations, the base, determine political institutions, the superstructure. Since economic classes structure society, political power naturally reflects class interests. 3. Coercion and law as tools of power. Law, police, courts, and bureaucratic institutions are used to maintain class hierarchy by enforcing capitalist property relations. This reinforces Marx's belief that power serves class purposes, not general public welfare. Why Marx considered power a temporary phenomenon. 1. Power exists only as long as class divisions exist. Marx believed that power is required to manage conflicts between classes. Once classes disappear in a communist society, coercive political power will no longer be necessary. 2. The withering away of the state. Following a proletarian revolution, a temporary proletarian state would dismantle capitalist relations. Eventually, when class antagonism ends, the state and instrument of class rule will wither away, leaving only a self-regulating, classless society. 3. Power is historically contingent. Marx saw political power not as eternal but as a product of specific historical conditions. Capitalism will give way to socialism and then communism, eliminating the need for coercive authority. Main features of the Marxian theory of political obligation. 1. Political obligation based on class interests. Unlike liberal theories that justify political obligation through consent or social contract, Marx argues that people obey the state because the ruling class imposes its power through economic dominance and ideological control. Example: religion, education. 2. No genuine obligation in class societies. Political obligation under capitalism lacks moral legitimacy. Workers obey laws not out of free will but due to coercion, economic necessity, or ideological conditioning. 3. Obligation to the proletarian state. Marx introduced the idea of revolutionary obligation. The working class must support the proletarian state after the revolution. This is justified because it serves collective emancipation rather than class domination. 4. Temporary and transitional obligation. Obligation to the proletarian state is temporary. Once communism is established and class distinctions vanish, political obligation will also disappear, as formal governance becomes unnecessary. 5. Collective, not individualistic, foundation. Marx rejects individualist justifications of obligation. Instead, political obligation arises from the collective struggle of the proletariat to transform society. Conclusion: Marx viewed power as inherently tied to economic structures and class relations. As long as society is divided into classes, political power will serve the ruling class. Because he believed that class struggle would ultimately end in a classless society, Marx saw power and the state as temporary phenomena. His theory of political obligation emphasizes the coercive nature of the capitalist state and a transformative role of proletarian revolution. Despite criticisms, Marx's analysis remains influential in understanding power, inequality, and political authority in modern societies. 10. Evaluate the relevance of Karl Marx's class conflict theory in the contemporary world. Compare and contrast the principles of communism with those of Gandhism. Introduction. Karl Marx's class conflict theory was developed in the 19th century industrial era to explain social inequalities and historical change. While the global political landscape has transformed significantly since then, many of Marx's insights remain influential in contemporary socio-economic debates. Alongside Marxism, other ideologies such as Gandhism propose entirely different paths to social justice and equality. Comparing communism with Gandhism helps understand two contrasting visions of freedom, equality, and societal transformation. Relevance of Marx's class conflict theory in the contemporary world. 1. Persistence of economic inequality. Despite technological progress and welfare measures, global wealth concentration has intensified. A small segment of society controls disproportionate economic resources, reinforcing class divides. Marx's idea of inequality arising from ownership of productive assets remains highly relevant. 2. Labor exploitation in new forms. Modern capitalism exhibits new versions of exploitation: contract labor, gig work, unregulated informal sector jobs, and global supply chains. These reflect Marx's theory that capital constantly seeks to reduce labor costs and maximize surplus value. 3. Political influence of economic elites. Big corporations, lobbying groups, and wealthy individuals increasingly shape state policies, echoing Marx's claim that the state serves the interests of the dominant economic class. 4. Globalization and class polarization. While globalization has created economic opportunities, it has also widened class disparities within and across nations. Workers in developing countries often face harsh conditions, mimicking earlier capitalist exploitation. 5. Growth of social movements. Movements for labor rights, minimum wage, anti-privatization, and economic justice show that class conflict continues to motivate activism worldwide. Marx's concept of class consciousness resurfaces in these struggles. Limitations in contemporary context. Modern economies have diversified. Not all individuals neatly fit into bourgeoisie proletariat categories. Welfare states and labor laws have partially mitigated exploitation. Identity-based conflicts, caste, race, gender, often intersect with class, complicating Marx's purely economic analysis. Comparison between communism and Gandhianism. 1. View of human nature. Communism emphasizes economic forces and class interests. Humans are shaped by material conditions. Gandhianism focuses on moral, spiritual, and ethical development. Humans possess inherent goodness and must cultivate self-discipline. 2. Method of social change. Communism advocates revolution and class struggle. Social transformation occurs through overthrowing the capitalist system. Gandhianism advocates nonviolence, ahimsa, truth, Satyagraha, and peaceful resistance. Change must be moral, not violent. 3. Concept of property. Communism supports abolition of private property in means of production and promotes collective ownership. Gandhianism accepts private property but encourages trusteeship, where owners use wealth for societal welfare. 4. Role of the state. Communism, strong socialist state during transition, eventual withering away of the state in a classless society. Gandhianism prefers decentralist, self-sufficient village republics with minimal state interference. 5. Economic model. Communism, large-scale, centralized planning, industrialization essential for socialist development. Gandhianism emphasizes small-scale industries, cottage production, and rural economy. 6. Relation to violence. Communism accepts violent revolution as a necessary phase of ending capitalist oppression. Gandhianism completely rejects violence. Means must be as ethical as the ends. Conclusion. Marx's theory of class conflict remains relevant in explaining contemporary economic inequalities, labor exploitation, and the political dominance of economic elites. However, modern complexities such as identity politics and welfare structures require a broader analytical framework. Comparing communism with Gandhianism reveals two contrasting paths to social justice, one rooted in material revolution and collective ownership, the other grounded in moral reform and nonviolence. Together, they provide valuable insights into the ongoing quest for an equitable and humane society. 11. Marxism versus Gandhianism, Communism. Introduction. Marxism and Gandhianism represent two influential yet fundamentally different ideologies that seek social, economic, and political transformation. While Marxism and communism focus on material conditions, class struggle, and revolutionary change, Gandhianism emphasizes moral renewal, nonviolence, and decentralized socio-economic structures. Their comparison highlights contrasting approaches to human nature, methods of change, and visions of an ideal society. Marxism, Communism. 1. View of human nature. Marxism holds that human behavior is shaped by material conditions and economic relations. People act according to their class interests, and conflict between classes is inevitable. 2. Economic foundations. Marxists argue that capitalism creates exploitation through private ownership of the means of production. Communism seeks to abolish private property in production and establish collective ownership. 3. Method of social change. Marxism advocates revolutionary class struggle. The proletariat must overthrow the bourgeoisie to end exploitation. Violence may be considered necessary for dismantling oppressive structures. 4. Role of the state. A strong proletarian state, dictatorship of the proletariat, is essential during the transitional socialist phase. Ultimately, the state will wither away when class distinctions disappear. 5. Economic model. Centralized planning, large-scale industrialization, and state control over production are central features. The goal is equal distribution of wealth and removal of class hierarchy. Gandhism. 1. View of human nature. Gandhi believed humans are fundamentally moral beings capable of self-improvement. Moral transformation, not material revolution, is the foundation of social change. 2. Economic philosophy. Gandhi accepted private property but introduced the doctrine of trusteeship. Wealth belongs to society and must be used for the welfare of all. He emphasized small-scale industries, self-sufficient villages, and a non-materialistic lifestyle. 3. Method of social change. Gandhism relies on nonviolence, ahimsa, and truth force, Satyagraha. Conflict must be resolved through love, persuasion, and moral example, not force. 4. Role of the state. Gandhi preferred a minimal state and decentralist democracy. Village republics were the core of his political vision. He feared that centralization, whether capitalist or socialist, would breed tyranny. 5. Ideal society. A harmonious, nonviolent society based on justice, equality, and moral self-discipline. Gandhism rejects class conflict and emphasizes cooperation and duty. Conclusion. Marxism and Gandhism share the goal of ending exploitation and promoting equality, yet differ profoundly in philosophy and practice. Marxism emphasizes structural change through class revolution, while Gandhism stresses moral transformation through nonviolence and decentralized living. Their contrasting visions continue to influence political thought, labor rights, economic models, and social movements across the world. 12. What are the main features of the Marxian theory of power? Introduction. Karl Marx's theory of power is rooted in his broader analysis of class, capitalism, and historical materialism. According to Marx, power is not an independent or neutral force. Rather, it is inseparable from economic relations and class domination. Power, in Marxism, arises from control over the means of production and is used by the ruling class to maintain its dominance over society. Main features of the Marxian theory of power. 1. Power as class power. Marx views power primarily as class power. The class that controls the means of production, land, factories, capital, also controls the state, law, and political institutions. Under capitalism, the bourgeoisie exercises power over the proletariat by controlling economic resources. 2. Economic determinism, base superstructure model. According to Marx, economic relations, the base, determine political, legal, and ideological institutions, the superstructure. Power flows from the ownership of economic resources. The state, law, and political power serve the economic interests of the ruling class. 3. Power as an instrument of exploitation. For Marx, power exists to maintain economic exploitation. The bourgeoisie uses political power to preserve private property, extract surplus value, and suppress worker resistance. Law, police, courts, and ideology act as tools to protect capitalist interests. 4. State as an agency of class domination. Marx described the state as a committee for managing the common affairs of the bourgeoisie. Political power is exercised through the state to stabilize the capitalist system. The state is not neutral. It supports the dominant economic class. 5. Power sustained through ideology. Marx emphasizes the role of ideology, religion, education, media, culture in legitimizing class-based power. These ideological institutions create false consciousness, making workers accept exploitation as natural or inevitable. 6. Conflict is the essence of power. Marx sees power as inherently conflictual. Class conflict between bourgeoisie and proletariat is central to understanding power relations. Power struggles shape history and social change. 7. Power as temporary and transitory. Power exists only as long as class divisions exist. After a proletarian revolution, the dictatorship of the proletariat will dismantle capitalist structures. Eventually, with the abolition of classes, coercive power and the state will wither away. 8. Collective, not individualistic power. Marx's conception of power focuses on collective action and class groups, not individuals. Historical change occurs through organized class struggle, not individual leadership. Conclusion. The Marxian theory of power presents power as fundamentally rooted in economic control and class domination. It sees political and legal institutions as instruments used by the ruling class to maintain its authority. Marx's framework highlights the conflictual nature of power and predicts its eventual disappearance with the abolition of class society. Despite criticism, this theory remains influential in understanding inequality, political authority, and social movements in contemporary society. 13. Write a note on circulation of elites as given by Vilfredo Pareto. Introduction. Vilfredo Pareto, an Italian sociologist and economist, developed the concept of the circulation of elites in his major work The Mind and Society, 1916. He challenged democratic ideas that power could ever truly belong to the masses. Instead, Pareto argued that in every society, power is always concentrated in the hands of a minority he called the elite. Over time, this elite is replaced by a new one, a process he termed the circulation of elites. Meaning of elites according to Pareto. Pareto identified two groups in society. 1. Elites, individuals with superior abilities, leadership skills, or organizational capacity. 2. Non-elites, the general masses who lack such exceptional qualities. Elites are not chosen democratically. They emerge naturally from social competition and human inequality. The theory of circulation of elites. 1. Inevitability of elite rule. Pareto believed that no society is truly egalitarian. A small minority always holds power, whether in monarchy, democracy, or dictatorship. Thus, elite rule is universal and unavoidable. 2. Circulation, replacement, of elites. Elites do not remain static. When the ruling elite becomes weak, corrupt, or resistant to change, it loses its ability to govern effectively. New elites rise from the non-elite masses. Old elites are replaced peacefully or violently by new, energetic, and ambitious groups. This continuous replacement maintains social stability. 3. Types of elites, lions and foxes. Pareto classified elites into two psychological types. Lions, strong, traditional, force-based rulers who rely on authority and coercion. Foxes, clever, manipulative, diplomatic rulers who rely on persuasion and strategy. Healthy societies maintain a balance between lions and foxes. When dominance shifts too heavily toward one type, circulation becomes necessary. 4. Decline of elites. Elites decline when they lose their vigor and creativity, become too luxurious or complacent, distance themselves from the masses, fail to adapt to new socio-economic conditions. This decline invites new contenders to seize power. 5. Continuous social process. Circulation of elites is not a single event but a regular, cyclical phenomenon. Every political system experiences it, regardless of ideology. Revolutions, elections, coups, and social movements all demonstrate elite circulation. Significance of Pareto's theory. Helps explain leadership change, political instability, and transitions of power. Useful for understanding political revolutions, party politics, military coups, and bureaucratic domination. Demonstrates that true mass rule is rare. Leadership is always concentrated. Conclusion. Vilfredo Pareto's theory of the circulation of elites presents a realistic and cyclical view of power dynamics. It suggests that while elites always govern, they are continually replaced by more competent or ambitious groups. This theory remains relevant for analyzing contemporary political transitions, leadership change, and the functioning of modern democracies and authoritarian regimes alike. 14. Write a note on the main principles of socialism. Discuss the ideal of socialism as given in the Constitution of India. Introduction. Socialism is a political and economic ideology that seeks to reduce inequality, promote social justice, and ensure that the wealth and resources of a society are shared fairly. It challenges the concentration of economic and political power in the hands of a few and proposes collective or state ownership of key resources. In India, socialism has deeply influenced constitutional values and governance, especially after the addition of the word socialist to the preamble in 1976. Main principles of socialism. 1. Equality and social justice. The core aim of socialism is to reduce socio-economic inequalities. It focuses on equal opportunities, fair distribution of wealth, and the elimination of unjust privileges. It does not demand absolute equality, but strives for a more balanced society. 2. Collective or public ownership. Socialism supports state ownership or collective control of the major means of production industries, natural resources, land, and capital. This prevents exploitation and ensures that wealth benefits society as a whole. 3. Welfare of all. Socialism promotes the idea of a welfare state that provides basic necessities such as healthcare, education, housing, and employment. The well-being of the poorest sections is prioritized. 4. Control over private property. Unlike capitalism, socialism limits the absolute right to private property. Property can be regulated by the state to prevent misuse, accumulation, or exploitation. 5. Planned economy. Socialism advocates central planning to ensure balanced economic development. 5-year plans in India reflect socialist-style economic planning. 6. Classless society. Socialism aims to remove class-based divisions by reducing the gap between the rich and the poor. It seeks cooperation rather than competition. 7. Democratic and ethical values. Democratic socialism emphasizes liberty, equality, and fraternity. Moral values like cooperation, human dignity, and social responsibility form its foundation. Ideal of socialism in the Constitution of India. 1. Constitutional commitment to socialism. The preamble declares India to be a sovereign socialist secular democratic republic. This reflects the nation's commitment to socio-economic justice and an equitable society. 2. Fundamental rights. Part 3. Fundamental rights ensure political equality and protect citizens from exploitation. Article 14, Equality before law. Article 15 and 16, Prohibition of discrimination and equality of opportunity. Article 21, Right to life with dignity. Interpreted to include welfare rights. These support the socialist vision of equal status and dignity. 3. Directive Principles of State Policy. Part 4. DPSPs are the backbone of the Constitution's socialist framework. They aim to create a welfare state by reducing inequalities, Art. 38. Ensuring adequate livelihood, Art. 39. Preventing concentration of wealth, Art. 39, c. Promoting workers' rights and just conditions, Art. 42. 43. Providing social security, Art. 41. 4. Economic policies and state control. The Indian Constitution authorizes the state to regulate property and nationalise industries when necessary, Art. 39, b. Land reforms, public sector enterprises, and poverty alleviation programs reflect socialist ideals. 5. Judicial interpretation. The Supreme Court has consistently upheld socialism as a guiding principle. In B.S. Satyagraha v. Union of India, 1983, the court declared that socialism in India means a blend of Marxism and Gandhianism, focusing on welfare and egalitarianism rather than total state control. Conclusion. Socialism aims to create a just and equal society by reducing disparities and promoting the welfare of all. The Constitution of India incorporates socialist ideals through the preamble, fundamental rights, and directive principles, creating a balanced model of democratic socialism. This framework ensures that India pursues economic development while safeguarding social justice, equality, and human dignity. 15. Explain the merits of socialism. What is the status of right to property in India after the 44th Amendment? Introduction. Socialism is an ideology that aims to reduce inequality, promote social welfare, and ensure equitable distribution of resources. It emphasizes collective responsibility and the role of the state in uplifting citizens. In India, socialist values have shaped political and economic institutions, especially through constitutional amendments such as the 44th Amendment, which significantly altered the status of the right to property. Merits of socialism. 1. Reduction of economic inequality. One of the greatest advantages of socialism is its focus on narrowing the gap between the rich and the poor. By redistributing wealth through taxation, welfare schemes, and public ownership, socialism aims to create a more balanced and just society. 2. Prevention of exploitation. Socialism discourages unchecked capitalism and prevents exploitation by regulating private property, labor conditions, wages, and working hours. This ensures protection for laborers and vulnerable groups. 3. Promotion of social welfare. Socialist systems prioritize access to essential services such as education, healthcare, housing, and employment. This leads to higher human development and better living standards. 4. Balanced economic development. Through centralized planning, socialism ensures that development occurs in all regions and sectors instead of favoring only profit-driven areas. India's 5-year plans reflected the socialist approach. 5. Emphasis on cooperation over competition. Instead of fostering individualistic competition, socialism encourages collective effort and cooperation. This can reduce social conflict and promote national unity. 6. Moral and humanitarian focus. Socialism promotes values such as equality, fraternity, dignity of labor, and social responsibility. It attempts to develop a society based on justice rather than mere wealth accumulation. 7. Protection of workers' rights. Socialist principles lead to strong labor laws, trade unions, and welfare programs. Workers receive better job security and fair treatment. Status of right to property in India after the 44th Amendment. 1. From fundamental right to constitutional right. Before 1978, the right to property was a fundamental right under Article 19, 1, F, and Article 31. The 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, 1978 removed these provisions and introduced a new article. Article 300A, no person shall be deprived of his property save by authority of law. This means that property is no longer a fundamental right but a legal/constitutional right. 2. Parliament's power to regulate property. After the amendment, the state gained greater flexibility to implement land reforms, acquire private land for public purposes, reduce compensation disputes. As a constitutional right, the right to property can be regulated more easily than a fundamental right. 3. Limited judicial review. Since the right to property is no longer a fundamental right, citizens cannot file a writ under Article 32 before the Supreme Court. They must approach high courts under Article 226. Judicial scrutiny is limited to checking whether the authority of law was followed. 4. Compensation requirement modified. The government must follow due process and legal procedures when taking property, but it is not constitutionally required to provide compensation equivalent to market value in all cases. 5. Protection against arbitrary action. Although diluted, Article 300A offers protection. The state cannot seize property without a valid law. Arbitrary or illegal acquisitions can still be challenged. 6. Balance between public interest and individual rights. The amendment reflects India's socialist approach by prioritizing land reforms and redistribution, ensuring that social justice prevails over absolute property rights. Conclusion. Socialism contributes significantly to social justice, equality, and the welfare of all citizens. Its emphasis on reducing inequality and protecting the vulnerable aligns with India's constitutional values. The 44th Amendment reshaped the right to property by transforming it from a fundamental right into a constitutional right, allowing the state greater freedom in pursuing land reforms and social welfare while still offering individuals legal protection against arbitrary deprivation. 16. Discuss the Gandhian technique of Satyagraha. Introduction. Satyagraha is the central pillar of Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy and political action. Developed during his struggles in South Africa and later applied in India's freedom movement, Satyagraha means truth force or soul force. It is both a moral principle and a method of peaceful resistance. Gandhi believed that righteous means are as important as righteous ends, and Satyagraha represents the power of truth combined with nonviolence to bring about social and political change. Meaning and philosophy of Satyagraha. The word Satyagraha is derived from two Sanskrit terms. Satya, truth. Graha, firmness or insistence. Thus, Satyagraha is holding firmly to truth. It aims to convert the oppressor through self-suffering, persuasion, and moral appeal rather than force or violence. Gandhi considered both truth and nonviolence inseparable. Nonviolence, ahimsa, is the practical expression of truth, satya. Only through peaceful methods can genuine, lasting change be achieved. Main techniques of Satyagraha. 1. Nonviolent non-cooperation. This involves refusing to obey unjust laws, orders, or systems. Gandhi used it extensively during the non-cooperation movement, 1920-22. It seeks to weaken the authority of the oppressor by withdrawing public support. 2. Civil disobedience. Civil disobedience means deliberate, peaceful violation of unjust laws. The Salt Satyagraha, 1930, is a major example. Its aim is not lawlessness but highlighting the immorality of certain laws. 3. Fasting. Fasting is a form of moral appeal intended to awaken the conscience of the wrongdoer. Gandhi used fasting to resolve communal tensions and promote self-purification. 4. Peaceful demonstrations and hurdles. Protests, marches, prayers, and mass gatherings form part of Satyagraha. These methods mobilize public opinion while avoiding violence. 5. Self-suffering, tapasya. Satyagraha emphasizes voluntary suffering as a means to convert the opponent. Gandhi believed that self-suffering touches the heart of even the cruelest adversary. 6. Negotiation and dialogue. Satyagraha is not rigid confrontation. Gandhi always kept open channels of communication. The goal is transformation, not destruction of the opponent. Ethical foundations of Satyagraha. 1. Truth, satya. Truth is the ultimate moral principle. The Satyagrahi must follow truth in thought, speech, and action. 2. Nonviolence, ahimsa. Violence destroys both the victim and the perpetrator. Nonviolence strengthens the moral force of resistance. 3. Fearlessness and self-discipline. A Satyagrahi must overcome fear, practice self-control, and willingly accept suffering for a just cause. 4. Faith in human goodness. Gandhi believed that every human being possesses an inner moral core capable of responding to truth. Historical importance. Satyagraha played a crucial role in India's freedom struggle. Champaran Satyagraha, 1917, Farmers' Rights. Kheda Satyagraha, 1918, Relief from Taxes. Non-Cooperation Movement, 1920. Salt March, 1930. Quit India Movement, 1942. It inspired global movements led by Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and civil rights activists worldwide. Conclusion. Satyagraha is much more than a political tool. It is a comprehensive philosophy of life rooted in truth, nonviolence, and moral courage. Gandhi's technique of Satyagraha emphasizes peaceful resistance, negotiation, self-discipline, and the transformative power of suffering. Its relevance continues in modern struggles for justice, equality, and human rights across the world. 17. Explain truth and ahimsa as pillars of the Gandhian concept of Satyagraha. Discuss the impact of the Gandhian philosophy on the different provisions of the Indian Constitution. Introduction. Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of Satyagraha is built upon two foundational principles: truth, satya, and nonviolence, ahimsa. These principles shaped not only India's freedom struggle but also influenced the moral and political vision of independent India. The Indian Constitution reflects several Gandhian ideals, particularly those related to justice, equality, decentralization, and peaceful social transformation. Truth, satya, as a pillar of Satyagraha. 1. Truth as ultimate reality. For Gandhi, truth is God. Truth represents moral righteousness, justice, and integrity. A Satyagrahi must always remain committed to truth in thought, speech, and action. 2. Truth as a method of social change. Truth is not just a personal virtue. It is a method for resolving conflicts. Gandhi believed that presenting truth with sincerity eventually persuades even the oppressor. Truth acts as the moral foundation that legitimizes civil resistance. 3. Truth requires transparency and honesty. A Satyagrahi must be transparent, honest, and fearless. By openly declaring intentions, the Satyagrahi encourages moral introspection in the opponent. Ahimsa, nonviolence, as a pillar of Satyagraha. 1. Ahimsa as a way of life. Ahimsa means complete non-injury in thoughts, words, and deeds. Gandhi viewed violence as destructive, while nonviolence is constructive and transformative. 2. Means and ends must be consistent. Gandhi held that nonviolent means must be used to achieve just ends. Violence breeds hatred, but nonviolence wins the opponent's heart. 3. Self-suffering rather than inflicting suffering. A Satyagrahi willingly accepts suffering to highlight injustice. This self-sacrifice is meant to awaken the moral conscience of the oppressor. 4. Ahimsa as a tool for collective struggle. Movements like the Salt March, Champaran Satyagraha, and Quit India movement proved that nonviolence can mobilize millions effectively. Impact of Gandhian philosophy on the Indian Constitution. The framers of the Constitution incorporated many ideals inspired by Gandhi, especially in the areas of social justice, decentralized governance, and peaceful social change. 1. Preamble. The preamble embodies values aligned with Gandhian ethics: justice, social, economic, and political, liberty and equality, fraternity promoting unity and harmony. These reflect Gandhi's vision of a just, peaceful society. 2. Fundamental rights. Part 3. Gandhian influence is seen in rights promoting human dignity, equality, and non-discrimination. Article 14, Equality before law. Article 15, Prohibition of discrimination. Article 19, Freedom of speech, peaceful assembly, movement consistent with Satyagraha. Article 25, Freedom of religion, reflecting Gandhi's belief in tolerance. 3. Directive principles of state policy. Part 4. DPSPs are the strongest expression of Gandhian thought. Article 40, Organization of village panchayats. Gandhi's dream of decentralized village republics. Article 43, Promotion of cottage industries reflecting his emphasis on khadi and rural economy. Article 47, Duty of the state to improve public health and prohibit intoxicating drinks aligned with Gandhi's emphasis on moral discipline. Article 46, Protection of weaker sections, including SC/ST reflecting Gandhi's fight against untouchability. 4. Fundamental duties, Part EVA. Many duties mirror Gandhian values, such as promoting harmony and rejecting violence, protecting public property, developing scientific temper and compassion, preserving the rich heritage of composite culture. 5. Abolition of untouchability, Article 17. One of Gandhi's lifelong missions was to end untouchability. This principle became a constitutional safeguard with legal enforcement. 6. Panchayati Raj system, 73rd Amendment. Gandhi strongly advocated for Gram Swaraj. The 73rd and 74th Amendments institutionalized decentralist governance. Conclusion. Truth and ahimsa form the ethical and methodological foundation of Gandhian Satyagraha. Gandhi's principles were not confined to the freedom struggle. They significantly influenced the Indian Constitution. From the preamble and fundamental rights to directive principles and Panchayati Raj, the Constitution reflects a deep commitment to justice, equality, peace, and moral governance. Gandhian philosophy remains integral to India's democratic and social framework even today. 18. Explain the shift in liberalism, from negative liberalism to positive liberalism. Discuss the Indian Constitution as a liberal constitution. Introduction. Liberalism is a political philosophy that emphasizes individual freedom, limited government, and the protection of rights. Over time, liberalism evolved from a narrow focus on non-interference, negative liberalism, to a broader approach that recognizes the role of the state in creating conditions necessary for real freedom, positive liberalism. This shift influenced constitutions around the world, including that of India, which incorporates several liberal principles. Shift in liberalism, from negative to positive liberalism. 1. Negative liberalism, classical liberalism. Negative liberalism, associated with thinkers like John Locke and Adam Smith, defines liberty as freedom from external interference. Key features. Minimal state, the state should interfere as little as possible. Laissez-faire economy, free markets without regulation. Focus on individual rights, especially property rights and personal freedoms. Suspicion of state power, the state is seen as a potential threat to liberty. Example, early industrial societies where government intervention was extremely limited. Limitations of negative liberalism. It ignored social and economic inequalities. Individual liberty became meaningless for the poor, illiterate, or unemployed. Led to exploitation under laissez-faire capitalism. As these weaknesses became evident, liberalism shifted direction. 2. Positive liberalism, modern liberalism. Positive liberalism redefines liberty as freedom to develop and realize one's potential. It focuses not only on rights but also on social conditions. Key features. Active role of the state. Government must create conditions that enable real freedom. Welfare measures, education, healthcare, social security, labor protections. Regulated economy, to prevent exploitation and ensure fairness. Equality of opportunity, everyone should have the means to succeed. Thinkers like T.H. Green, Lasky, and Keynes promoted this view. Significance of the shift. The transition reflects the understanding that rights are meaningful only when backed by social and economic support. Modern democratic states thus blend individual freedom with welfare-oriented governance. The Indian Constitution as a liberal constitution. The Indian Constitution is one of the best examples of positive liberalism combined with democratic values. 1. Protection of fundamental rights, Part 3. The Constitution guarantees essential liberties. Article 14, Equality before law. Article 19, Freedoms of speech, assembly, Citation. Article 21, right to life and personal liberty. These reflect core liberal protections against state overreach. 2. Rule of law. The Constitution upholds the rule of law, ensuring that government power is exercised within limits and subject to judicial review, a central liberal ideal. 3. Independent judiciary. Judicial independence protects citizens from arbitrary state action. The Supreme Court's power of judicial review is a key liberal mechanism. 4. Representative democracy. Universal adult suffrage ensures political equality and participation, foundational liberal democratic values. 5. Secularism. The Constitution ensures freedom of religion and prohibits state discrimination based on faith, reflecting liberal respect for individual conscience. 6. Social and economic justice. Part 4, DPSPs. Liberalism in India is not purely negative. It is positive and welfare-oriented. Directive principles aim to reduce inequality, R38. Secure adequate livelihood for all, R39. Provide education, health, and social security, R41 to 47. These reflect positive liberalism ensuring real conditions for freedom. 7. Liberty with social responsibility. India's liberalism is balanced. Freedoms under Article 19 come with reasonable restrictions to maintain public order, morality, and security. 8. Federalism and decentralization. Power sharing between the Union, states, and panchayats, 73rd and 74th Amendments, strengthens local self-government and individual participation, important liberal features. Conclusion. The evolution from negative to positive liberalism marks the shift from minimal state intervention to a welfare-oriented approach that ensures real freedom for all. The Indian Constitution beautifully incorporates both traditions. It protects individual liberty through fundamental rights and judicial safeguards while promoting social and economic justice through directive principles and welfare commitments. Thus, India stands as a vibrant example of a modern liberal democratic state where freedom and welfare coexist harmoniously. 19. What are the general factors causing political obligation? What is Thomas Hobbes' perception of the state of nature and political obligation? Introduction. Political obligation refers to the moral or legal duty of individuals to obey the laws and authority of the state. Different philosophers and political theorists have identified several factors that create such obligations. Among them, Thomas Hobbes provides one of the earliest and most influential explanations, rooted in his understanding of human nature and the need for political authority to avoid chaos. General factors causing political obligation. Political obligation arises from a combination of moral, social, psychological, and practical factors. The major factors include 1. Consent or agreement. Many theorists argue that political obligation is based on explicit or implicit consent of individuals. Citizens obey laws because they have voluntarily accepted membership in society, social contract theory. 2. Legal duty and fear of punishment. The authority of the state is backed by law. People obey to avoid penalties, imprisonment, or loss of property. This is the coercive basis of political obligation. 3. Common good and public interest. Citizens obey the state because laws maintain order and promote social welfare. Public goods like security, roads, and education exist only when citizens cooperate. 4. Habit and social conditioning. People are socialized from childhood to follow rules. Obedience becomes a matter of habit and cultural expectation. 5. Moral duty and loyalty. Citizens often feel a moral responsibility to support the community, nation, and constitutional values. Patriotism also plays a role. 6. Utilitarian considerations. Individuals obey because the benefits of political order outweigh the cost of disobedience. Peace and stability make life secure and prosperous. 7. Fear of anarchy. Many obey the state because they believe that without authority, society would collapse into disorder and violence. This factor strongly echoes Hobbes' reasoning. Thomas Hobbes' perception of the state of nature. 1. Human nature, selfish and competitive. Hobbes saw humans as driven by self-interest, desire for power, and fear of death. In the absence of authority, these instincts lead to conflict. 2. Life in the state of nature. According to Hobbes, the state of nature is a pre-political condition where no government or law exists. It is characterized by constant insecurity, competition for resources, mutual distrust. Hobbes famously described it as a state where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. 3. Natural equality leading to conflict. Since all individuals are roughly equal in strength and intelligence, no one can dominate completely. This equality leads to competition, fear, desire for glory, resulting in a war of all against all, bellum omnium contra omnes. Hobbes' theory of political obligation. 1. Social contract as the basis. To escape the violent state of nature, individuals voluntarily enter into a social contract. They surrender all their natural rights, except the right to life. In return, they gain security and peace. They choose an absolute sovereign, the Leviathan, to enforce law and order. 2. Absolute authority. Hobbes believed the sovereign must have complete, unquestioned power. If citizens could challenge authority, society could fall back into chaos. Thus, political obligation is total and continuous. 3. Fear and security as motivating factors. Political obligation arises because individuals fear the horrors of the state of nature. The sovereign provides protection. Hence, obedience is a rational choice. 4. Limited right to disobey. Citizens may resist only when the sovereign threatens their life. Survival is the only natural right that cannot be surrendered. Conclusion. Political obligation arises from several factors, including consent, societal benefit, habit, moral duty, and the fear of disorder. Hobbes provides a powerful explanation grounded in human nature and the necessity of authority. His view of the state of nature as violent and chaotic supports the need for an absolute sovereign, making obedience not just a duty but a rational necessity for security and peace. His ideas remain influential in understanding authority, law, and political stability in modern states. 20. Discuss the grounds of political obligation and examine the political obligations under the divine right theory and the social contract theory. Introduction. Political obligation refers to the moral or legal duty of individuals to obey the laws of the state and support its authority. Different political philosophers have offered various explanations for why citizens should obey the state. Two of the most influential theoretical foundations are the divine right theory and the social contract theory, which represent contrasting views on the origin and justification of political authority. Grounds of political obligation. Several factors explain why individuals feel obligated to obey the state. 1. Consent of the governed. Citizens obey because they have either explicitly or implicitly agreed to be part of the political community, a core element in social contract theories. 2. Fear of sanctions and legal enforcement. Laws are backed by coercive power, and individuals obey to avoid punishment or harm. 3. Utility and public welfare. People obey because political order provides benefits such as security, justice, and economic stability. Disobedience may harm society as a whole. 4. Moral duty and loyalty. Citizens develop a moral obligation toward the state out of patriotism, shared values, and cultural traditions. 5. Social conditioning and habit. Individuals are socialized from childhood to respect laws and authority, making obedience habitual. 6. Fear of anarchy. People comply with authority to avoid disorder, violence, and insecurity that may arise without government. These grounds of obligation form the basis of various theories, most notably the divine right theory and the social contract theory. Political obligation under the divine right theory. The divine right theory was prominent in medieval Europe and early modern monarchies. 1. Source of authority, God. According to this theory, kings derive their authority directly from God. The king is considered God's representative on earth. 2. Obedience as a religious duty. Since political authority comes from God, obeying the king is a religious obligation. Disobedience is equivalent to disobeying God. 3. Absolute and unquestionable authority. The monarch's decisions are final and cannot be challenged by the people. Political obligation is unconditional and total. 4. No right to resistance. Subjects have no right to revolt, even if the king is unjust. God alone can judge or punish the monarch. 5. Justification of autocratic rule. The theory supported absolute monarchies in England, France, and other European states. This became a major target of criticism by later thinkers like Locke. Evaluation. The divine right theory lacks democratic legitimacy and denies people any participation in governance. It is incompatible with modern constitutionalism and individual rights. Political obligation under the social contract theory. The social contract theory emerged in the 17th to 18th centuries through thinkers like Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, offering a rational and secular basis for political obligation. 1. Basic idea. Individuals lived originally in a state of nature, without government. To escape insecurity, they agreed, explicitly or implicitly, to form a political society. Political obligation arises from this voluntary agreement. Hobbes' view. The state of nature is violent and chaotic, war of all against all. Individuals give up all rights to an absolute sovereign. Political obligation is absolute because only the sovereign can ensure security. No right to revolt except to defend one's life. Locke's view. The state of nature is relatively peaceful but insecure in matters of justice. Individuals give limited powers to the state to protect life, liberty, and property. Political obligation is conditional. If the government violates rights, people may revolt. Rousseau's view. People voluntarily surrender to the general will. Political obligation is based on obeying laws created by the people themselves. Sovereignty lies with the people, not the ruler. Conclusion. Political obligation arises from multiple grounds such as consent, law enforcement, social welfare, and moral duty. The divine right theory justifies obedience through religion and absolute monarchy, offering no space for popular participation. In contrast, the social contract theory bases political obligation on rational consent and the protection of individual rights, forming the foundation of modern democratic states. Together, these theories highlight the evolution of political authority from divine command to popular sovereignty and constitutionalism.